got a call from my mom. She said, Kim, your father's been killed. You need to come home immediately to California.
The murder happened in that kitchen right over there.
There were no fingerprints left behind. There were no footprints. There was no weapon found. And there was no DNA. Who did this?
Like many men who are in a midlife crisis, he decided, I want a beautiful young thing.
I did say, hey, Dad, it's quite obvious she's using your money. He's like, I know that.
This is not even 48 hours after her beloved fiance had just been brutally murdered. She is now shacking up with some young boy toy, Beat Mommy's new boyfriend, who's an NFL player.
Fans would chant, the Posky, the Posky. It was wild.
Somewhere along the line, she decided, you know what, this muscle man is going to come in very handy for me.
Looks like we got Eric and Posky on the phone. It's just days before Christmas when shots ring out in the quiet California neighborhood of Newport Beach.
Newport Beach emergency, please fire paramedics. What's the problem there?
Now, that 911 call coming from Balboa Coves is made by Kevin McLaughlin, who was in this debilitating accident just a few years earlier.
What do you need a police for, sir? I can't understand what you're saying.
He was 21 years old, and he was skateboarding down the bike path. And somebody came from behind at 65 miles per hour who was very drunk and hit him. And he had traumatic head injury.
Kevin is the son of Bill McLaughlin. He is living with Bill McLaughlin. He is caring for him since that accident. So he has trouble speaking. He's trying to get the words out to explain to the 911 operator that his father is dying before him on the kitchen floor.
Okay, is it your father or your dog? Okay, we still have to do anything now.
The radio call came out as shots fired, home invasion. Shootings in Newport were rare, extremely rare.
911 for my where's emergency?
So when the call came out, we got everything rolling in that direction. When I arrived at the scene, I was given a brief that the victim was a man in his 50s who appeared to be shot several times and was lying dead in his kitchen. He'd been pronounced dead.
Bill McLaughlin on the floor. He is in a pool of blood and he is dead. And that's what his son came down to find.
So my siblings are Jenny, who is 2 years younger than myself, and Kevin, who's 4 years younger than myself. I was born in Torrance, in LA. And when I was in 4th grade, we moved to Newport Beach.
The thing that's interesting about Newport is that in addition to that beachy vibe, it also has a tremendous amount of money. So it's almost like Beverly Hills at the sea for Southern California. We're talking about multi-million-dollar homes on the water with docks to accommodate their own yachts.
There's old money there, there's new money, there are self-made millionaires like Bill McLaughlin.
Bill McLaughlin grew up in a pretty poor family on the south side of Chicago, and he wanted to be a millionaire by the time he was 30. So he was very ambitious.
After high school, he went into the military, and then after the military, he went to college. He was first in his family to go to college, and then he went into biotech and did very well for himself.
Bill McLaughlin and his partner developed this technology in the mid-'80s that separates plasma from blood. It was actually a huge contribution to modern medical science, and the technology itself is still in use today.
It takes blood from a healthy person and runs the blood through the machine and separates it out and puts blood cells back into the body so that the plasma can be filtered off for biomedical purposes, like for hemophiliacs or plasmapheresis patients.
You know, this is not developing just another widget to put on your phone. This is something that is saving lives.
Definitely, and he was very proud of that.
His business partner was really the genius inventor in this. Bill McLaughlin was more the business guy. He was the marketing guy. They invented this, and then they sold it to a major pharmaceutical company. And so the money that was available to him because of this was off the charts. We're talking tens of millions of dollars in 1980s money.
The money he was making off that unit was very extensive. He had 2 homes in Las Vegas, he had an airplane, he had a boat, and he had a huge house in Newport Beach that was actually on the canals. The main home that Bill lived in was on Balboa Coves.
From speaking to people that knew Bill, said that he was a no-nonsense guy when it came to business. That business, he would kind of put his tough guy hat on, and it was his way or the highway. But to a person, everybody that said that as a family man, he was truly exceptional.
One of his favorite things to do for adventure was he was a private pilot. So he loved to fly for fun, small planes. He bought a Piper Malibu, a single-engine 6-seater, and he flew that a lot. All of us kids would be in back, and one time we flew over the Grand Canyon. So it was a fun way while we were growing up to have a weekend and time together. We had a really loving, wonderful, healthy family growing up. Family was very important to my parents. It was a number one priority.
You mentioned your parents. Would you say that they had a good marriage?
Yes, growing up, they were married for 20 plus years. And then later, we ended up all going off to college and moving out of the house. They ended up growing apart and ended up divorcing. And my dad, I don't think, was quite ready for that. It was devastating to my dad. It was a shock to our family.
Then, on December 15th, Kim's family is destroyed forever.
I was living in Tokyo, Japan, working at an international school. It was a Friday night in Tokyo, like at 2 a.m., and got a call from my mom. And she said, Kim, your father's been killed. You need to come home immediately to California. And so I didn't understand it at all. I threw the phone at the wall. I was in shock, complete shock.
Who did you think might have been capable of killing your father?
We had absolutely no idea.
I'm sure that was the first question police asked you.
Yes.
Did he have any enemies? Who were they?
Whenever you have a murder case, the very first question is, who would want to do it?
I was examining the scene when I first got there, when I was being briefed, and I noticed that there was a key still in the door lock of the main door into the house, which was odd because either the person inside that house knew this person or the suspect had actually ended up getting a key from somebody to gain access.
The detectives, because of this situation with so few people having permission to have keys, they pretty much decided this was an inside job. Balboa Coves is an exclusive gated community.
All the houses are on the bayfront in Newport Beach.
Recently, Matt Gutman and I visited Balboa Coves, and we realized it's a very secure location. To get into the main car gate, you need a passcode, and to get into the pedestrian gate, you need a key.
Balboa Coves, this is where Bill McLaughlin lived.
You know what's fascinating is that coming here all these years later, this is virtually the same. I think there's a new paint job on the house, but everything else is exactly the same. It's still a beautiful home. You know, they have their own dock.
It's a big
It's
home.
a big house. It's several thousand square feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the house Kim and Jenny and Kevin McLaughlin grew up in.
What kind of people live in this community?
Well, number one, there's a lot of money here. It's this kind of bizarre mixture of wealth and, you know, that laid-back California lifestyle, and it's all here. And that's why Bill McLaughlin, you know, chose to live here.
It was December 15th, 1994. Bill McLaughlin was just flying in from Las Vegas, where he spent a couple days a week.
He landed and he drove home and got home just before dinner. He had dinner with his son.
Kevin was not typically home on Thursday nights because after the accident, he had been drinking a lot and he was going to AA meetings.
Was his schedule pretty well known around the house that Thursday night was the night that he went to AA meeting?
Yes, definitely.
No one knows why, but for whatever reason, Kevin didn't go to his meeting that night. So they had dinner together. Kevin went upstairs to listen to some music.
Bill was downstairs at the time, was going through with papers.
His son was upstairs in his bedroom. And it was a little close to after 9 o'clock at night when he heard some bang, 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 bang.
He told me that he heard a shot, so he came downstairs and found Dad. Yeah, on the kitchen floor like that.
You're the only one that can talk to me? Okay, we're on the way. We're gonna help you. Is your door unlocked?
And the operator didn't understand him because he already had like impaired speech from the injury. And he was traumatized, obviously, and in a panic.
At first glance, it looked like possibly a burglary that was interrupted, and Mr. McLaughlin, unfortunately, was shot.
Police walk into the house and they find a very distraught Kevin McLaughlin and Bill McLaughlin, who's been murdered in his kitchen with 6 bullet holes in his chest. And they also find 6 expended shell casings. And they knew it was a 9mm.
Bill was a gun collector, so initially when the police came, they said, "Hey, are there guns in the house?" And Kevin said, "Yes, there are guns in the house. And have you shot any of them recently?" And he said, "No." So he pointed them to a locked gun box.
They were able to eliminate all of his firearms as being potential sources for the expended shell casings that they recovered in the kitchen.
There were no fingerprints left behind. There were no footprints. There was no weapon found. And there was no DNA. Who did this?
Kevin didn't do it. And they also did what's called GSR testing, or gunshot residue testing, on his hands. They determined he had not fired a firearm that night. So Kevin is eliminated. Kim is in Japan, and Jenny's in San Diego. And they all love their dad to death.
So, Matt, the murder happened in that kitchen right over there.
That kitchen right there was the murder, and neighbors from all around could hear the shots. Guns are loud, and a 9mm is a pretty good sized round. And what was interesting about that is they were delivered in 2-shot increments. It was boom, boom, pause, boom, boom, pause, boom, boom. It's called the double tap technique. It is so loud, and at that point, he's got to get out of town. The killer could hear Kevin calling out for his dad and coming down the stairs.
I was examining the scene when I first got there when I noticed that there was a key still in the door, the main door into the house. At first I thought maybe the patrolman that first arrived found a hiding key and used this key to access the residence.
They find 2 keys. One of the keys found stuck in the lock of the front door of Bill McLaughlin's home was a newly cut key from Ace Hardware. They also find a second key near the entryway.
The key to the front door, which was freshly cut. The other key was the one on the mat that was an original pedestrian access gate key. That said, do not duplicate. So this is the current pedestrian access gate. This is all chain link back then. The bike path is right behind you. So basically all you need is a key and you have access to the community. Now this gate used to be right at the end of the cul-de-sac, which was literally feet away from the front door of the McLaughlin home.
So having that key to the access gate was critical.
Yes.
When they discovered the keys, that was kind of a huge issue because how many people have access to a key that allows you into the complex and a key that allows you into Bill's house?
When I went back outside the residence, I was advised by one of the patrolmen that a female had just arrived in a car and had identified herself as a fiance. I'm sorry to get your full name. All right, thank you. Well, I'll give this officer here to take care of you. We were unaware at the time that the victim had a living girlfriend.
I look at Nanette's interview with the police. I'm listening to everything she says, but there's little things that weren't said.
Despite all of his wealth, the early 1990s are pretty rough for Bill McLaughlin. His wife of over 20 years has left him, and now he's caring for his adult son, Kevin, who's been in this life-changing accident.
He had to learn how to live on his own and take care of himself again. And it was awful. It was devastating. And my dad, that was his son. That was his only son.
Bill McLaughlin was certainly at a crossroads in his life. He had a long marriage, it dissolved, he didn't know where to turn, and like many men who are in a midlife crisis, he decided, I want a beautiful young thing. That'll make me feel good.
Nanette Packard in the early 1990s is a very attractive, very fit young woman. She's a mom, but she doesn't look like your normal mom. She has very sexy photos taken of herself, and she posts them. She puts them in magazines to try to attract wealthy men.
She literally placed an ad called "For Wealthy Men Only" in the singles connection. Single white female, 25, looking for an older man, 30 plus, who knows how to treat a woman. You take care of me, and I'll take care of you.
Hi. Nanette, speaking about her relationship with Bill for the first time, told me that she had placed an ad, but that's not how she and Bill met. Now, when I spoke to her, we were both wearing masks because of concern about COVID. How did you meet Bill?
I met him through an ad.
What kind of ad?
Not the one you think.
What is the one I think?
Well, the one you guys all have reported on.
Which one is that?
That you have put all over the news. I met him through an ad that he wrote.
He wrote an ad?
Yeah. Something older man looking to meet younger woman to date. He was super gregarious, friendly, well-spoken.
What was your first impression of her?
I thought it was really odd that she was my age.
Literally your age.
Literally. But we were trying to also support my dad and his happiness.
Nanette Packard, depending on who you asked, she was a different person to different people.
No, that was a quick wave.
The one thing that no one disputes is that Nanette is a loving mother. Lachelle is her first daughter, and she spoke to 2020 about the McLaughlin murder for the first time. How would you describe your mother to someone who's never met her?
I would say she's passionate and loving. She's one of the biggest motivators I've ever met. Like, even every single man that she ever married, that sounds funny, but she motivated them and helped them grow.
Nanette met her first husband-to-be. He goes by K. Ross, last name Johnston. They were both working in a gym.
She got married to my dad when she was 19, so she got married pretty young, had kids young.
How old were you when they got divorced?
I was 2 when they got divorced.
So how old were you when she met Bill?
I would say probably around 5 or 6, maybe.
Pretty soon after dating, she moved into our home at Balboa Coves, where we grew up. We had already left home. Nanette moved into one bedroom, and the kids each had their own room as well.
He took not only her in, but also her two very young children and treated them as though they were his own. He treated her like a queen. He bought her gifts. He gave her an expense account. He let her drive a luxury car. He took her on vacations. She really had it all. She was living the high life.
He was so sweet. He would take us out on his boat around the little Bay Area. We went on trips together, and he would take us to Vegas, and he had a little plane. He'd let us sit in the front and fake like we were driving.
When Bill met Nanette, he really was impressed with her because his wife was never really very interested in his business affairs, and Nanette seemed to want to soak up every single thing he said.
It's going to sound kind of cliche, but he was sort of like a father figure.
Yeah.
He believed in me. He taught me about business. He included me. I did all the finances for everything.
Signing authority on some of his accounts. I think over the years he began to rely on her more and more just to handle some of the stuff that he didn't particularly want to handle.
They lived together for 4 years like that. And at one point I did say, hey Dad, it's quite obvious she's using you for your money. He's like, I know that.
He said he knew that.
Mm-hmm. He knew that she was very comfortable in her situation. She was enjoying the life that my dad was providing for her.
I feel like she was kind of somebody who liked to rise above and wanted more for her kids. We were always her number one priority.
My parents divorced when I was very young. They fought over us. My mother worked from 3 to 11. When I had kids, I made a promise to myself that if there was anything they would know, that they were loved.
She used men for her own personal goals. It was more important than love, it was more important than a relationship with anybody she had, because she wanted to have financial security so that she didn't have to worry about money.
On the night of the murder, a woman pulls up and identifies herself and says, you gotta let me in the house. And who are you? She says, that's my fiance. That's my fiance.
She finds police tape all over the place in the place where she lives. There's cops everywhere. She's talked to the police and they interview her in the back of a car, and they're explaining to her that her fiance is dead. He's been murdered.
Police question her, the tape recorder rolling.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your full name. She seemed genuinely concerned about the welfare and well-being of Mr. McLaughlin.
What were your activities today? Say so around here.
I was shopping. I picked up some stuff from my son had a soccer game.
She was at her son's soccer game in Walnut, which is about 30 miles from Newport Beach. She was there with her ex, her first husband.
It was over about we had double overtime. And then I went to Southwest Plaza. Christmas shop with pizza.
And she went to Nordstrom, Crate and Barrel, and somewhere else. And she had bags in her car when she arrived at the crime scene, showing that she had just been there.
She came across as concerned fiance, but I take everything with a grain of salt. For detectives, you're going to look at the spouse or loved ones, boyfriend, husband, wife. No bones about it. We were going to follow Nanette and find out what her story was.
Is there a place to stay? I stayed at the other house.
Bill McLaughlin owns 2 houses in Newport Beach. One is the Balboa Coves house. The other is on Seashore Drive. And that's just down the coast.
It's too much to comprehend.
That's all right. All right, Nanette. Thank you. Well, I'll get this officer here to take care of you.
Immediately, we started surveilling the residence that we took her to the night of the homicide, and I was part of that team. On the second night of the surveillance, I observed a Pathfinder parked directly in front of the garage. What I witnessed kind of shocked me.
Nanette Johnston, also known as Nanette Packard, allegedly lived off her boyfriend, Bill McLaughlin, a Newport Beach millionaire. At the time, she was 25.
You have to understand, this is Newport Beach, and it's a very wealthy, high-end, well-established community. this particular murder of one of their residents, and a wealthy resident at that?
Just after 9 p.m. on December 15th, 1994, someone used a key to enter McLaughlin's home.
There was a lot of pressure on him to work this case, to solve the case. Rightfully so.
McLaughlin was shot 6 times. He died in his kitchen. McLaughlin's son heard the gunshots and found his father's body. He called 911.
Who has a motive to murder Bill McLaughlin?
You're going to look at the spouse or loved one's boyfriend, husband, wife.
Who did you think might have been capable of killing your father?
We had absolutely no idea.
I'm sure that was the first question police asked you.
Yes.
Did he have any enemies? Who were they?
Well, and possibly his business partner that he was in a lawsuit with, because that business partner was very angry.
And that lawsuit was a big deal because it was determined that he would have to pay McLaughlin $9 million. No small sum, all right?
The night he was murdered, he was literally sitting at his kitchen table reading through these court documents regarding this very contentious, long-running litigation with his former business partner.
The detectives drove to Santa Barbara and they interviewed this guy.
So the reason why we're up here today is William McLaughlin, the person that you were involved with civil litigation, has been murdered in his home.
Further investigation into the ex-business partner, we were able to determine that he had an ironclad alibi.
He was in Santa Barbara at the time getting his haircut.
He was 150 miles away from Balboa Coves on the night of the murder. So, great lead, but it didn't go anywhere.
So now, who else might it be?
All of a sudden, who appears on the scene? Somebody who nobody knows about before.
During the time that the police were interviewing Nanette, she only talked about being at the soccer game, coming home, and from the indications, she was alone. However, she did at one point in the interview say, "We left."
We left the soccer game.
And nobody caught on to ask her who's we.
We only discovered this once we had interviewed Nanette's first husband, who was the father of the children playing in the soccer game.
I'm interviewing Mr. Kevin Ross Johnston at his residence in Walnut, California.
He had notified them that she had been in the company of a large-built male.
Who's Nanette with at the time? A guy named Aaron. Big, husky guy, muscular build. As far as you know, his name's Eric, but you don't know a last name, is that correct?
Nanette told Kay Ross, her ex-husband, who saw them both at the game, "Don't tell police that Eric was with me, because Eric had nothing to do with this." So initially, she was trying to hide the fact from the police that Eric was with her at the game.
Who's this Eric? Who's this big football player? We need to talk with him.
They had Nanette under surveillance after the murder, and they are sitting outside of the beach house watching Nanette.
What I witnessed kind of shocked me. I saw this large, muscular gentleman, good-looking guy, walk up, hug and kiss passionately Nanette. This is not even 48 hours after her beloved fiance had just been brutally murdered.
All right, Eric, explain last name first. N-A-P, West K.
Eric Muskie is a former NFL player who played for the New England Patriots.
Numerous teams. Yeah, he played for the Jets, he played for the Cowboys, played for the Patriots. He ended up in the World League. I don't know if anybody remembers the World League, but he played for Barcelona, captain.
There was Eric Naposki.
When they had games at their stadium, there were banners with his name on it. The fans would chant, Naposki, Naposki. It was wild.
Eric Naposki is in his late 20s. He's divorced, and he's got 2 young daughters who live with their mother back east.
And then he moves out to California, and that's where his life changed forever.
Am I in trouble for something? I hope not. I hope not, too, because I don't understand. Okay, right now your new name has been interjected into this scenario, okay? I didn't think that'd be new. You know, totally new. I mean, I think anyone that knows anything about me has seen me around. Okay.
Initially, what Naposki says, he distanced himself from Nanette. Makes it as if it was a casual relationship.
Well, you're involved in a relationship. Nanette's a pretty good friend of mine. Can you find a good friend? Yeah, we've been friends for 2.5 years since I met her. Would you describe it as a dating relationship? Boyfriend, girlfriend? Yeah, I wouldn't say a solo, total, like I have girlfriends, you know, and people that I date also.
He was trying to play it off as, well, we weren't really exclusive, when in fact, he thought they were. He was about to ask her to marry him, and she had just taken him to her sister's wedding, and he had just taken her home to meet his mother, so it was pretty serious in his mind.
Well, he was fun. Okay, so we used to work out at the gym together, and we would hang out, which Bill knew about. I would go out with him.
Was that romance? Was that love? Was that...
No.
Sex?
Yeah.
When you heard that Nanette was cheating on your father, did it confirm all your suspicions about her?
We were pretty shocked, and then we started getting suspicious of all kinds of things.
She's seeing Eric at the same time that she is actually engaged to Bill McLaughlin, but Eric apparently doesn't know any of this.
What was the relationship with Nanette and Bill? From what I gathered, it was kind of a mentor, almost like a father-daughter type thing, like a mentor. So you didn't see this romantic relationship or a boyfriend-girlfriend? No, I didn't.
It's odd because she tells Eric that she's living with Bill McLaughlin and sharing a house strictly as business partners, but there's no connection between them romantically, and this is at a time when they were engaged, her and Bill.
Why didn't you tell her?
Because I didn't. No, I never thought about it. I just, because he wouldn't like that. That's why. I mean, you know.
Did Bill and Eric know about each other?
Well, yes, Eric knew about Bill, and Bill knew that Eric was my friend. He didn't know we were having an affair. He knew that we worked out together and stuff.
When I spoke with her recently, Nanette admitted that she was cheating on Bill. But back in the 90s, she told detectives that she and Bill had an arrangement.
Is there an understanding between you and Bill? You can date younger guys on the side, just don't embarrass me. And if I need
Kind of unspoken. Okay, maybe it wasn't the most intense romantically, but I did love him, and he was a good man, and he was good to my children, and I would never have killed him, and probably would still be with him today if he were alive, because I had no reason.
Eric Naposki actually believed that this was his woman and that they were going to ride off into the sunset together.
And he was totally bamboozled by her.
And then somewhere along the line, she decided, you know what, this muscle man is going to come in very handy for me.
Looks like we got Eric Naposki on the phone. Hello? I want to ask you about Nanette.
The best evidence that we have in this case was Eric Naposki's mouth.
The things that are relevant is that I did not do anything. You wanted to start with truth? Let's start with that truth.
His demeanor in general is very combative.
Unfortunately, you're seeing a female, Nanette, who has a relationship with the deceased. Does that give me motive for anything? I'm asking you. No, it does not. And I told you that. I have no reason in the world to harm anybody.
Eric wants to think that he is as smart as anybody in any room, if not a step above. He's constantly being evasive. He's telling the detectives that they're wrong.
And it wasn't a secret relationship. Not at all. Did Bill know about it? I have no idea. I do not think so. Okay.
Every time he talks, he tightens the noose tighter and tighter.
But what ultimately I think starts to turn the tide is when he lies about his gun.
Now, the first time detectives interview Eric Naposki, they ask him whether he carries a gun in his work as a security guard.
Did he do any army? No, I don't do any arms. I don't even have a sidearm.
He had a bodyguarding side business, and he definitely had guns.
In that first interview, Naposki gradually reveals that he does own guns, and more than one of them.
In case they don't build any fires up. No, I bought one. I haven't seen him so long. I bought one in Dallas that I gave my dad as a .380. Okay, so your dad's got that now. Mm-hmm.
And then as the interview progresses, of his own volition, Eric says, "Oh yeah, I had another gun."
there was that 9mm. I did have this 9mm, but I gave it to a buddy of mine to work a security job, and he got it stolen out of his car. Really? Well, that's interesting. What's your buddy's name? His name is Joe David Jimenez.
Oh, you know Eric Naposki?
When the police tracked down Jimenez, he said, yeah, he gave me a gun.
Then they say, what's the deal with this Beretta 92F that Eric gave you? And he says, what Beretta 92F?
And the gun that Eric and I dealt with was a 380 Jennings. Like a 39 special.
Like, yeah, he gave me a gun for a security job, but it was a Jennings 380.
Did he ever loan you the other guns? Nope. Never did. Never did.
They came back and said, we figured out that you weren't honest, that you said you gave your Beretta to Joe David Jimenez, and it turns out you gave a 380.
How could you confuse giving Joe David a 9mm gun? I didn't confuse it. Honestly, I just told you misled. Well, I misled you, yeah, because I felt scared.
Where is your 9mm?
I have no idea. You have no idea. That's my statement.
So now all of a sudden you have Eric Naposki having lied about a gun that could have killed Bill McLaughlin, and then when asked about where that gun is, he won't say anything. It's pretty damning evidence.
Why did you lie to them about that 9mm Beretta? The fact that you had it when you denied it.
I really didn't know which way to go with it. And I just didn't want to talk about it. Because if I wasn't at the scene, and I wasn't in Newport, then I couldn't have killed the guy even if I had a bazooka.
Then it comes to light that Nanette has allegedly been stealing from Bill McLaughlin.
The way we found out about that is because my sister and I were up in the office and realized that, wait a minute, in this account, there's not much money left. What happened here?
Nanette Johnson started stealing from Bill McLaughlin in February of 1994. That's right about the time that she starts dating Eric Naposki. You can literally look at the amount that she is embezzling from Bill, and you see the more serious her relationship becomes with Naposki, the more money that she's stealing.
And as Detective Byington would say, that's a clue.
I did write a check the day after he was, when I panicked the day after, because I was like, I'm going to have to pay the bills. But all the other checks he knew about were business expenses. Did I buy some things too? And I said, yes. But he knew he liked doing that. He didn't mind.
Nanette told me Bill knew she was moving money out of his account and that most of it was going to pay his expenses.
Detectives alleged Nanette forged Bill McLaughlin's signature on a series of checks totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Our fraud detectives were able to get a successful filing and prosecution against Nanette for embezzlement.
And so what they did arrest Nanette for was for forging the checks and embezzling the money. So there was an arrest, just not for murder.
She pleads guilty to forgery and grand theft. She's sentenced to a year in jail.
But neither Eric nor Nanette are charged in the murder of Bill McLaughlin.
The original district attorney at the time did not pursue filing charges because she didn't think there was enough evidence at the time.
There's no murder weapon, there's no eyewitnesses, there's no physical forensic evidence that links the suspects to the murder of Bill McLaughlin. You can have suspicion, but they believed at the time that they were missing the fundamental nuts and bolts to put the case together.
We all knew who was probably good for that murder. I guarantee you the family knew who was good for that murder.
The family really was frustrated and they were disheartened.
Someone had murdered their father viciously and appeared to be getting away with it.
We're just hopeful that if anybody does have information, they'll do the right thing.
I knew it had not been solved. I thought, wow, if they knew what I knew, they would certainly make an arrest.
When you get one of these cases, you need to literally go through every single piece of evidence and every single line in every single report.
The McLaughlin case was very well investigated before I got there. It had almost everything we needed. It just hadn't been figured out yet.
Larry Montgomery, he sees stuff that other policemen don't.
As they start the reinvestigation of this case, Detective Montgomery interviews a very important witness.
And I said, what took you so long?
She had placed an anonymous call to the police in 1998 saying that she was aware of a murder.
He said, "Oh, I didn't do it, but I might have had someone do it." He didn't want to be on the hook for having committed the murder, but yet he wanted to brag about having pulled it off.
Nearly 15 years later, prosecutors say they have enough evidence to go to trial.
The accumulation of all the evidence in this case led us to file charges at this time.
This was a case of a love triangle. It was a wealthy older man, it was a younger, attractive gold digger, and her much younger lover.
There was money involved, jealousy, and one of the defendants was a former NFL football player.
There is no money on the horizon for either one of them unless Bill McLaughlin dies.
And wouldn't you know, she goes and finds yet another husband, a third husband. Think about what a great liar she has to be to convince these other husbands that she's their soulmate. And she's never done anything wrong in her life.
You may have been warning these people that their lives were
warning them that it is not safe to be in the same household with her.
Nanette would never kill the golden goose, so she would be with the pauper.
He said, "Oh, maybe I did it and maybe I didn't do it." And he smirked.
Just the devil with lipstick.
December 15th, 1994.
McLaughlin's son heard the gunshots and found his father dead downstairs.
If anybody does have information, they'll do the right thing.
McLaughlin was shot 6 times. He died in his kitchen.
Now, detectives may have thought they had solved the 1994 murder of Newport Beach millionaire Bill McLaughlin, but when the prosecutor declines to prosecute, the case goes cold.
McLaughlin, a millionaire businessman, was shot in his Newport Beach home. I think a lot of people were wondering, like, will justice ever be served?
The murder happened in 1994.
I knew that Eric and Nanette were neck deep involved in this murder, but we didn't have enough evidence at the time. So it was pretty much dropped. The case was put in a cold case file.
When Nanette wasn't arrested and Eric, like we thought they should have been, we had to remove ourselves from that and start to go on in life and surround ourselves with positive things.
McLaughlin's fiancée, Nanette, does 180 days in jail for taking Bill's money.
She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 1 year in jail for that case.
But no one is charged with taking Bill's life. Nanette and the other prime suspect, her secret boyfriend, Eric Naposki, are free to go about their lives.
The murder investigation went cold.
They thought they had gotten off scot-free.
It didn't take long for Eric to realize that this wasn't going to be a happily ever after with Nanette.
They kind of go their separate ways romantically.
And then she was back in the dating game right after that.
Ultimately, she lands herself another millionaire in Orange County.
Well, my father, Nanette's second husband, he was in real estate.
Come on, JC, show us your cheer. JC Packard was born 5 years after the murder of Bill McLaughlin, and she really wants people to know that she loves and fully supports her mother.
JC, look over here. JC, show me the picture.
If it's gonna show the world that she is a good person and that she's done so many great things with her life, that I want to do that for her.
When we interviewed JC, she said as a kid, she never heard the name Bill McLaughlin, never heard that her mom had been convicted for stealing his money, or that she was a suspect in his murder.
I had no idea. No, I didn't know about that growing up.
See?
My mom kind of repeated the pattern. If you look in her life, she married somebody older who was wealthy, and then she cheated with somebody who was younger. And that happened again.
Come here and give me a kiss.
She moved on. She met this cute
guy in a hotel lobby.
And wouldn't you know, she goes and finds yet another husband, a third husband.
How many men did your mother marry?
3 actual marriages and 1 engagement.
There's some people that have called her a gold digger.
I don't think that she married men just for money. I think she ended up choosing men to create the lifestyle of being able to be a stay-at-home mom and being able to give us things and take us on vacation.
Hi, Grandpa!
I know that my mom and Bill were close. She genuinely loved him and cared for him. And I think the same with my stepdad.
I mean, think about what a great liar she has to be in order to convince these other husbands that she's the perfect woman, that she's their soulmate, and she's never done anything wrong in her life.
And Eric tries to get back into the World League of American Football. In 1996, he goes back to Barcelona, the Dragons again. You know, the fan club starts up again, and he's really popular.
And I was happy for him. I said, you know what? He's moved away from all this drama. He's playing professional football. He's living out there in Barcelona.
But he said there were 2 football moments in his career that stand out above the rest. He said number 1 is probably making the Patriots roster. Number 2 is winning that World Bowl in 1997.
And a year or 2 later, he retired and then really restarted his whole life in Connecticut. Met a gal, had a child, had a second one, got married for, I think, about 5 years, and was living back east.
He was not weird or different, you know, twitchy. It wasn't like he got away with something.
So let me tell you about this reality show that I put together.
And cameras rolling.
I put together a former actor. We had a professional model that was a young kid that we tried to bring in to create some drama. And then we had the bad boy character.
Bad guy? No, I'm not a bad guy. We just have a slightly different interpretation of the law.
So I called Eric up and I got him to come out and film.
So he's got a different life happening for 15 years while this investigation is cold.
He assumes that he's home free at this point.
And then I never heard from them again. So I figured it was closed, right?
Nothing has come up in years with that case. It's cold, it's dormant, it's on the shelf somewhere in the back room of a police department in California.
They got my alibi, they got my phone records, they talked to the witnesses, and they found out that I wasn't in Newport.
And then everything fell apart.
Cold cases are never dropped, murders are never closed.
In May 2009, when he's in his car and he's backing out of his garage, getting ready to go to work,
Pulls out of the driveway, gets pulled over.
He's descended upon by just all kinds of police cars and SWAT vehicles and everything.
And he's like, no way. Can't be.
Millionaire, you're under arrest. Kidding me? I'm under arrest for murder. Yes. Yes.
I first learned about this case from a wonderful prosecutor named Debbie Lloyd, who told me on my first day, McLaughlin is a case that you need to look at.
The McLaughlin case was very well investigated before I got there. Matter of fact, it had almost everything we needed. It just hadn't been figured out yet.
So, Larry Montgomery, my investigator, and I went and we met with detectives at the Newport Beach Police Department. We're going through these dusty boxes, piece by piece.
It was probably 4 good-sized boxes of information. One box was just audio tapes.
Larry Montgomery decides to take a look at the transcripts and the people who were interviewed.
We had a call come in. A young lady wanted to talk about that homicide.
One of the main guys who was a suspect in the murder was a neighbor of mine, Eric Naposki.
And it slipped through the cracks.
I was able to find one person named Susan Kogar that had been talked to.
Eric was my neighbor at my apartment complex, and he told me about this girlfriend that he had, and she was living with this older man, and he's the man who was killed. And he told me that how he hated the man, and he said, I'm going to have him killed.
Suzanne Kogar was never truly interrogated correctly. And because of that, no one found her or went after her as a potential witness in the initial investigation.
So when we contacted her, she was a gold mine.
I would run into him when I was going to the mailbox, the laundry facilities, the pool. So we definitely got to be friends.
She was a neighbor of Eric Naposki's at the time that Eric was dating Nanette.
Eric was very outgoing, very friendly. He did share a lot, except when it came to Nanette. I would see him at the pool with her about every other weekend or so. The first time Eric mentioned Bill McLaughlin to me was one evening in November of 1994. He finally admitted that he had been dating Nanette, and then he explained to me that she was living with a man and that he was her business partner.
Eric Naposki confided in his neighbor, Suzanne Kogar, that his girlfriend, Nanette, was being sexually assaulted and harassed by Bill McLaughlin.
And he said, I'm going to have him killed. So he explained that Bill McLaughlin had his own private plane and a second home in Las Vegas, and that he planned to be flying there at Christmas time. So Eric said he was going to have Bill's plane blown up.
Bill McLaughlin is a man of character. He's a man of substance. So, no, Bill McLaughlin never sexually assaulted Nanette.
In my conversations with Nanette, she categorically denied that she ever told Eric anything about ever being maltreated by Mr. McLaughlin.
Sometime in January of 95, after Naposki had actually moved out of the apartment complex, Suzanne was back home in her apartment and Eric showed up.
So he came in and he asked, have you seen any cops around here? And I said, no, why? And he said, oh, well, you know, Bill McLaughlin, he was killed. Somebody killed him. Somebody shot him.
And during her conversation with him, he then said that he even owned the same kind of gun that was used in the killing.
I put up my hands and I said, I don't even want to know if you had anything to do with it.
When you have somebody who's telling you information that only the police would know and the killer would know, how would Eric Naposki know unless he used that gun?
And then he said, well, maybe I did it and maybe I didn't do it. And he smirked when he said it.
Suzanne Kogar told detectives that Naposki also told her about the keys found at the murder scene.
He said there was a key left at Bill McLaughlin's house, and the police think that I had that key made at a key shop right down the street.
The killer, we know, left an Ace Hardware key stuck in the door, and it was freshly cut.
The Ace Hardware is located not far from where Eric Naposki lived, and the owner of the Ace Hardware recalls seeing Naposki before the murder of Bill McLaughlin.
In 1994, I owned an Ace Hardware. Keymaking was an extremely large part of the business.
And they show him a picture of Eric Naposki, and he looks at that and goes, yep, I made keys for that guy.
Eric came into the store and asked where I can get some keys cut. And I went into the key room, cut his keys, and gave them to him.
So before the murder, Eric Naposki had Ace Hardware keys cut. We had an Ace Hardware key, brand new Ace Hardware key, stuck in the door of Bill McLaughlin's home. When you look at the evidence in this case, each individual piece might not be that significant. But when you look at everything in light of everything else, the picture starts to become very clear that Nanette manipulated Eric Naposki into believing she'd been sexually assaulted by Bill McLaughlin. And that's the thing that would motivate Naposki to murder another human being.
So the investigations progress, and Detective Montgomery continues to listen to more tip calls. One day, he lets a cassette tape run to the end.
I knew it was going to be shut off, but I left it on for some reason, and all of a sudden, you hear, hello?
I just was calling about the Johnston case.
The lady goes, yeah, I just read this article in the newspaper about this girl who's in custody named Nanette, so I peeked up.
We both said to each other that her and Eric had done it.
What made you think that?
Well, my fiance had a business plan, and they knew each other from the gym. At that point, she was telling us that she needed somewhere to put this big sum of money that she was going to get, that she was going to be very wealthy, a millionaire.
And it wound up being a man named Robert Cotreau, who was starting a software company.
It was in June when I had mentioned to her that I was looking for financing for my business. It really wasn't until
November that we sat down.
He said, yeah, I had a meeting with Lynette, and she expected to come into a lot of money sometime after January 1995 and be able to invest up to $100,000 into my software company. Our murder happened on December 15th, 1994. What could possibly happen that Lynette Johnston would believe she's coming into money? And that was the death of Bill McLaughlin.
All the stars aligned. Matt said that we have enough. We got enough to arrest them and file. I knocked on her door. She answered a short time later. She cracked the door open, said, "Can I help you?" And I go, "Do you remember me, Nanette?"
I didn't get this case until almost 10 years after the murder took place. So we're working it out, but everybody's moved on at this point except for the family. And so now time is kind of on our side.
We started putting surveillance teams on both the East Coast and West Coast 24/7 to make sure that that's where they were living. We were assisted by law enforcement officials in Connecticut who were surveilling Eric Naposki, and the Newport Beach Police Department was surveilling Nanette over on the West Coast.
We had two teams. Larry Montgomery went out to Connecticut to arrest Eric Naposki. And we had a second team on Nanette's house to make her arrest.
The police were really clever about this. They put out these arrest warrants, and they worked with the police department in Connecticut where Eric lived. They followed Eric, leaving his house. They basically, stopped him, got him out of the car, and made him lie face down in the middle of the street. They arrested him. And, they took him in for questioning.
Basically, you're under arrest. The reason that is because of the murder of Bill McLaughlin back in 1994.
Kidding me?
No. I was hoping that Eric would be willing to make a phone call to Nanette, who doesn't know he's arrested, and basically lay her out, because Nanette is the one that orchestrated this whole thing.
I'm not talking to the girl since I went down. I didn't kill anybody. I'm not a killer.
Even after all these years of being treated the way he was by Nanette, totally backed her completely. So we called Sergeant Byington and said, he's not talking, so go ahead and arrest her.
Once I received a phone call from Larry saying that Eric was in custody, but he wasn't going to cooperate, we proceeded to, with raid gear, go up to the front door and knock on Nanette's house.
In 2009, they came knocking at my door like a SWAT team. I had just got out of the shower. My baby was literally still breastfeeding.
Nanette answered a short time later. She cracked the door open, maybe a few inches, said, "Can I help you?" And I identified myself. I go, "Do you remember me, Nanette?" She goes, "No, I don't." I said, "Okay, well, I have an arrest warrant for you." She goes, "For what?" I go, "For murder." She goes, "Whose murder?"
He goes, "Well, I don't know how many murders you've been involved with, but we're talking about the murder of Bill McLaughlin."
And at this point, she tried to shut the door on us. And I said, "Well, that's not going to happen." So we opened the door. At this point, the color drained from her and she was in shock. And I put my handcuffs on her.
And they told me they were going to arrest me, and I was in shock, of course. I called my husband at the time. I said, "You need to get home right now for the baby."
Nanette Packard stood before an Orange County judge. A court order bars us from showing her face. But this was the 43-year-old yesterday after she was arrested at her home in Ladera Ranch, charged with murdering her former boyfriend, Bill McLaughlin, nearly 15 years ago. It was sensational. This was a case of a love triangle. It was a wealthy older man, it was a younger, attractive gold digger, and her much younger lover who happened to be a former football player in the NFL. Also charged with his murder, Packard's former lover, Eric Naposki.
One of the things that I'll never forget is I called Kim McLaughlin and I said, "Hey, I just want to let you know, we made arrests today." And there was this pause on the phone.
And they said, "We just arrested Eric McLaughlin for the murder of your father."
Wow. The words you've been waiting for 16 years.
Yes, for many years. It was too good to be true, really. It was one of those things that you can't believe when you get the phone call. And I screamed and jumped about
10 feet in the air, and I went down to my knees, and I couldn't believe it.
As a prosecutor, that's what you live for. You know, if you're doing it right, is you're fighting for the family members of people that were murdered.
When did you first hear that your mom was arrested? In 2009. And what was that like?
I was in my apartment while I was in Cal State Long Beach, ready to take a final, and it was like almost summertime. And then my stepdad, my third stepdad, called me, and he said, "Hey, are you sitting down?" And so I sat down, and then he told me that she was arrested for murder. And I'm like, why is this happening? I was 21 when she got arrested the second time. I was sitting in class, and the phone rings. My teacher goes to pick it up, and they're like, "JC, you're getting picked up early." And I said, "Mom's in jail," and I started crying. I remember just going to my room and crying for hours.
They were both charged with murder, and depending on the circumstances, it could be death penalty or it could be life without the possibility of parole.
These trials, especially in these cold cases, it's like a war. There's so much that goes into these that, when you got one shot at it, it's better to make sure you get it right.
And the killer then walked into his house and shot Bill 6 times. At 9:10 and 1 second, right after Bill McLaughlin's heart stopped beating, Annette Johnston became a millionaire, at least on paper.
Eric, let me ask you the simple question. Did you murder Bill McLaughlin?
Did what?
Did you murder Bill McLaughlin?
My dad was an extremely bright guy and loved to philosophize, loved to have engaging conversations, and he wasn't gullible. Nanette had him completely fooled.
So did you think that Eric and Nanette would somehow pull yet another fast one and evade justice again even after the arrest?
Possibly. We wouldn't put anything past those two.
The trial taking place more than 16 years after the murder of the Newport Beach millionaire. It was a headline-making trial.
Opening statements finally got underway today in the murder trial of a former NFL linebacker, Eric Naposki.
It was a case where, there was money involved, jealousy, maybe intricate planning, and one of the defendants was a former NFL football player.
There's no hard evidence, there was no DNA, there were no fingerprints, there was nothing.
It was very much circumstantial evidence. If anybody could handle this case, it was prosecutor Matt Murphy.
He took that Beretta 9mm that he owned, he aimed it at Bill McLaughlin.
The single most important piece of evidence that we had against Eric Naposki was Eric Naposki. The way he lied to the police.
Yeah, I think Eric made a mistake. Number one, speaking to them, but number two, by not disclosing the second gun.
When police questioned Eric Naposki back in 1994, Eric first denied that he had a gun. Then his story evolved.
They said you don't own any firearms though. No, I bought one. I haven't seen it in so long. I bought one in Dallas that I gave my dad as a .380.
He didn't mention the 9mm until 45 minutes later. Like, okay, just to make sure, you don't own any firearms, nothing other than the .380. And it was like, well, yeah, there was my 9mm.
It was a Beretta that was the murder weapon, and it was a Beretta that Eric had failed to talk about. But, in terms of the defense, Berettas are one of the most common guns around, and any Tom, Dick, or Harry can go get a Beretta, from the local gun store.
Lying about the murder weapon is something that is indicative of guilt. It was never recovered. So really you look at, why is Eric Naposki lying about this gun? And to this day, he has never told us a story that is not demonstrably false regarding that firearm.
One of the biggest debates in Eric Naposki's trial was his alibi. Did he have enough time to get to Bill's house by 9:10 p.m., shoot him, and then get to work?
The fact that it was a gold case had a direct effect on Naposki's defense, and you're trying to now go back and recreate an alibi. It's extremely difficult. Every single thing has to fit. And that was the real challenge here. Take it now?
Yes, I am. That's the Christopher man. That's it. Come on, Chris.
So we are at the soccer field. So I want to take you back to December 15th, 1994. This was a game that was going on with Nanette's child, Christopher. So her son is there. She's here with her ex-husband. Eric Naposki is with her. And the game went into triple overtime.
And the fact that they left this field at 8:20, that they got into the car at 8:24, those are some of the facts in this case that are simply not disputed by anyone, right?
Right.
Okay, so they come rushing down that ramp into this parking lot. So where does the state believe that they went from here?
So what we believe is they drove directly from this parking lot to Balboa Coves.
But the defense says otherwise, that Nanette dropped Eric off at his apartment in Tustin.
So this is where Eric Naposki used to live.
So what did Eric Naposki and Nanette say that they did when they dropped him off, and why did they drop him off here?
Eric said, I was in a big hurry to get to work. I came here, I changed, I got my stuff together, and then I went to the Denny's, and I made a call from a payphone in the Denny's.
So, if you take your car and you drive to Walnut Soccer Field, and then you drive straight to Newport Beach, the chance of you putting 6 bullets in someone's chest, in someone's house, is relatively zero. Add a phone call to that, and it's definitely off the table.
But investigators drove that route multiple times.
We drove every conceivable route.
We drove the same time of the year, same date of the year. We drove different speeds, 48 miles an hour.
And there was no difference between that night and when we actually prosecuted the case. Every single way you slice and dice Eric's story puts him at Balboa Coves in plenty of time to commit the murder.
And he insists to police, I have a phone record, and on my phone records will show that I called to the Thunderbird nightclub at 8:52 p.m.
He had hired an attorney, and the attorney had presented the phone record showing that he made a phone call from the Denny's.
During the trial, private investigator James Box testified for the defense that back in 1995, he had seen the credit card bill with the call, but there was no longer any direct proof of it.
I don't know what happened to Bailey's document, and I don't know what happened to Box's document. They had the original. I had multiple copies for multiple years. But how long do you hold something?
Well, if your life depends on it, your whole life, I would think.
Well, not really. Not if you think that they already cleared you and you haven't heard a word back.
To be perfectly honest, I looked at the jury. I looked at the way that they were receiving the information. I saw a couple heads shake here and there, and it didn't look to me like it would be favorable for Eric.
Eric Naposki, a former NFL linebacker turned bouncer, was convicted today of killing Bill McLaughlin. So when the verdict was read, guilty of first-degree murder, he was shaking his head like he couldn't believe it.
We very much miss our father. We're very sad over his loss, but very happy that justice has been served on his behalf. During the trial, the defense argument was Nanette's the one who had more motive and opportunity to kill Bill.
You know, the murder of this man was fundamentally orchestrated by Nanette.
And he was totally bamboozled by her.
I would trade the slayer for the mastermind any day.
Guilty of first-degree murder, a former football player has been convicted of killing his lover's boyfriend in his Newport Beach home.
Eric Naposki is guilty of this, and we got one more defendant to go on this thing. Eric Naposki lied again and again and again. He lied about his relationship with Nanette. He lied about the disappearance of those firearms. Deliberate attempts to mislead the police over and over and over again. Then he gets convicted, and then he wants to talk again.
He wanted to meet with the prosecutor because he wanted to come clean with his knowledge on who the real killer was.
So of course we're going to listen.
Everything I do say will be 100% honest, and I'll take a polygraph to everything I say, if anyone doubts it.
And he spins yet another yarn, contradicting everything he'd ever said before.
This is a murder for hire. Annette Johnson hired someone to go into Mr. McLaughlin's house, the one she shared with him, and kill him.
He was adamant. She hired a hitman. I know this.
He was there in the room when they talked about it, but then he says, but apparently he went behind my back and made arrangements with Nanette, so the two of them, planned this. I wasn't me.
But I definitely was not the one doing the killing. I was definitely not the one doing the hiring. This was Nanette's role.
He also happened to mention that the Beretta 9mm that was used in the murder, that it was his gun.
The killer absolutely 100% used it. I guarantee you.
You said the gun that you bought for Nanette was the one that was used in the murder?
Yes.
The way he describes it, he is a co-conspirator in a murder case. Even if it was true, the way he describes that, he is still 100% guilty for exactly what he was convicted of.
As Matt Murphy put it, we investigated, and it's absolute crap.
6 months after Naposki's trial, it's Nanette's turn.
Opening statements got underway today in the trial of a woman accused of orchestrating the murder of her millionaire boyfriend for money and using her lover to do it.
It's almost like Eric was her gun. He was her murder weapon.
What role did you play in Bill McLaughlin's murder?
0.
So if you had no role in Bill McLaughlin's murder, who did? Who did do it?
I can't tell you for sure because I don't know for sure. I never said that Eric did it because I couldn't say that Eric did it for sure. I don't know that. He never said that to me. But when I looked through all that paperwork and he told some lies about different guns or whatever, different things, I could see how it really looked that way.
Orange County Bureau Chief Eileen Frere has more from the courthouse in Santa Ana.
It was a fairly packed courtroom that includes some of the victims' family members.
Even her own defense attorney called her a cheater and a liar and a thief, but not a murderer.
Hate her as much as you want. For being a thief, a liar, a cheat. The entire defense was, look, I know my client's not a good person, but that doesn't make her a murderer, and it doesn't.
Either he's going to find out that she's cheating on him, or he's going to find out that she is stealing from him, and as soon as that happens, she's out with nothing. So she has to murder Bill McLaughlin.
At 9:10 and 1 second.
Another incriminating item from the prosecution's PowerPoint was Eric and Annette house hunting before Bill's murder.
There were huge situations like Nanette and Eric Naposki going to look at $1 million homes in Irvine 3 months before the murder occurred.
Where on earth could they be thinking that they're coming into money? There is no money on the horizon for either one of them unless Bill McLaughlin dies.
Since I've been 19 years old, I look at real estate every weekend. I looked at real estate with Bill. I looked at real estate with Eric. Now, I did look at some with him.
If Bill McLaughlin dies, Nanette instantly gets a $1 million life insurance policy payout, a $150,000 provision in the will, and most significantly, she will have access as the trustee of his estate to all of his wealth.
They portrayed it like I stood to gain money. That's what they said, right?
That was the whole thing.
Well, let me tell you that I was on all... I only gained money if Bill was alive.
Nanette would never kill the golden goose, so she would be with the pauper. Eric doesn't bring enough to the table for her to be willing to leave Bill. Just didn't make sense.
Who kills the golden goose? Well, everybody forgets. This is exactly what the farmer did in the Aesop fable. He killed the golden goose because he was greedy. And that's exactly why. Nanette was greedy. She didn't want to wait. She saw this money and wanted it for herself.
Now we're going to turn to that verdict in the lurid trial involving a former NFL star, his lover, and her wealthy fiancé.
Understand you've reached a verdict in this case.
I thought for sure she would come home. I was 4 months pregnant.
We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
When the verdict was read, she showed no emotion. The only person who really showed emotion on her side of the family was her daughter.
When they said guilty, I couldn't even move. My husband had to pick me up and carry me out of the courthouse.
Bill McLaughlin's family was tearful. They were overjoyed. This was a long time coming for them.
Thanks to our system, today's the day. She got what she deserved.
McLaughlin's daughters say true justice won't be done until Naposki is sentenced. His sentencing is scheduled for August 10th. When he was actually sentenced, his true colors came out. We all kind of looked at each other like, is this really happening?
Was sentenced to life in prison for the shooting death of her millionaire live-in boyfriend. Today's decision was nearly 20 years in the making.
Nanette no longer can go out and play the Orange County housewife. She can't drive the nice cars, wear the nice clothes, do the nice jewelry.
Nanette is in prison and she'll be there for the rest of her life. And same with Eric Naposki.
He's getting led away in the waist chains, and his hands are cuffed, and he turns to me and says, "You blew it." I got to wave bye-bye to him, and then he said, "I'll see you again." You see a little vignette into the real personality of Eric Naposki. And that's in front of a judge that's being escorted by armed bailiffs. I'm surrounded by armed detectives, and imagine what he's like when nobody's around.
You have a prepaid call from Eric Naposki.
Eric, let me ask you the simple question. Did you murder Bill McLaughlin?
Not a chance. Not a chance in hell.
I was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and convicted and given a life without possibility of parole sentence. I did not do that, but I am here.
How many of the women here in front of me have committed a violent crime in their past? Okay. How many have been convicted of a violent crime?
She made mistakes and she's not perfect, but who is?
There's imperfect and then there's imperfect.
I wanted to just get to the truth and ask her, did you really do this? I didn't make her explain everything. I just said, did you know about the murder? Did you plan this? Did you have anything to do with it? And she looked me in the eyes and said, no.
Watch me. Good boy, Keel.
Here at the Central California Women's Facility, these dogs are being trained to eventually help someone with a disability.
So we teach them to heel backwards too.
In theory, the dogs are the ones learning, but PUP's program, which is short for Puppies Uplifting Prisoners' Spirits, is designed to actually have inmates educate themselves.
So with each dog, we make journals for them. This is for my current dog, Falcon, so there's only a few months worth of stuff in it.
Time in prison has generally changed you, but has this dog program changed you as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing. They just bring so much healing.
Good boy.
And it also helps to make it a difference for me to be able to live with the fact that I'm away from my kids, to be able to wake up each day.
So look, one of the things that is easy to do, it's easy to get kind of caught up in the evidence and forget the real emotional toll that this had. There's this domino effect of human suffering and grief.
I envision my mom coming home all the time. And every time I wake up, because in my dream I'm bawling my eyes out like she's home. She's finally home. And then to wake up and realize that it wasn't real it's heart-wrenching. It really is.
It was a path of destruction that Nanette Packard left behind her. There are a lot of victims in this.
What impact do you think that your mom's choices have had on your life?
I feel like her choices have showed me that a simple life is amazing and to cherish every single day with my kids. And so I think it's just helped me to live in the moment and enjoy what I have and be thankful.
Is there a possibility that Eric and Nanette could be released from prison at some point.
I hear that's the case, that California legislature is changing.
Do you think he'll ever go free?
Yes, I do. I believe so.
How would that make you feel if you knew that Eric and Annette had gone free?
Horrified. Scared for the community. I would distrust the legal system. And I would lose faith in everything that had felt so satisfying and gratifying. Their life's been taken away from them, and hopefully they're thinking about what they did. What I miss most about my father is just having him as a friend. And I know he'd be very proud of us and the choices we're making. It's hard not to have him be able to share that here on Earth with them. We miss him dearly. I miss him dearly.
As you can see there, a mix of fear and grief. Victims on both sides, David.
Yeah, really no question about that. But that is an interesting program for those prison inmates, a way to try to find new purpose. In the meantime, that is 2020 for tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm David Muir.
And I'm Amy Robach. For all of us here at ABC News in 2020, good night. Do you remember the last thing you ever said to her?
I told her, I said, I love you and I'll see you tomorrow. And she said, I love you too, I'll see you tomorrow. And it didn't happen.
No way you can say it other than Mickey has been murdered.
Occasionally I'll read about a case and get mad and I want to get involved.
John Grisham, world famous, the author of dozens of books focusing on crime, was immediately hooked.
I show up over there and she's laying on the bed, multiple gunshot wounds.
Why Mickey? How could anybody do this to Mickey?
As the police are investigating, there is an important piece of information. 4 months earlier, there had been another murder in Clifton.
They said, we found your sister, and she's gone.
Jerry had a teenager killed. They had a school teacher killed. That's a lot.
And tell me I'm arrested for the murder of Mickey.
Not in a million years would he ever even think about doing something like that.
He just thought he was so smart. He didn't think anybody would ever dream that he would do that.
The fact you have 2 murders in 4 months is pretty substantial. I'm going to dig a bit deeper. I thought this was a fascinating case.
It is the most unbelievable case you will ever know. It's simply unbelievable.
Before prison, was it ideal? Were you living your dream?
Oh yes, perfectly. I may get emotional.
It's painful to remember what life was like before.
When you have your soulmate and you love each other and you respect each other, it makes life wonderful. And we had a wonderful life.
This story begins as a love story in small-town America, a place called Clifton, Texas.
Clifton is a small city in central Texas, about 35 miles north of Waco.
It's got a little bedroom community to Waco. Very peaceful, quiet.
Tight-knit, very school-oriented, good place to live.
Clifton lived for football. Everything revolved around that.
In a lot of ways, it was a Friday Night Lights town.
Everybody seemed like a family here. Good place to raise your kids.
Kids walked the streets, everybody played outside, everybody knew everybody here.
Everybody knew everybody's business. If they didn't, they just made it up.
Like any small town, there are complicated relationships and hidden secrets.
In 1985, Joe Bryan was the principal of the local high school.
I loved it. I could not wait to get to work every day.
His wife, Mickey Bryant, taught 4th grade at the local elementary school.
I bet every kid in Clifton, Texas had Miss Bryan for a 4th grade teacher. Everybody, they just loved her.
Mickey actually grew up in Clifton.
She's very quiet, shy. You could make her blush. Very smart. If you gave her a basketball or a golf club, tennis racket, she was super competitive.
She was one of the Clifton Cubs stars for the basketball team.
She was Miss Clifton High School.
She's perfect.
Joe Bryant actually grew up 45 miles away in a place called Elmont, Texas, with his twin brother Jerry and his older brother Jim.
Joe was very popular, and he was always laughing and kidding someone.
He was a cheerleader in high school, friendly with everybody.
Being around Joe was always the best time. He always liked to dress up. He always liked to look good.
He read a lot. He played the piano. He played all kind of music. Of course, he played in the church.
At Christmas time, he used to play the piano in my grandmother's house in the big living room. I just remember being like in pajamas, dancing around to him playing the music.
Joe and Mickey met when they were kids, but they began dating when they were in their late 20s.
I was dating one of her cousins. I said, why don't you come down and spend the weekend? She said, well, okay, I guess I can get Mickey to come with me. All through the weekend, I kept thinking, I might be going with the wrong girl. Mickey and I started dating, and about a year and a half later, we were married.
They were always together.
Joe couldn't carry on a conversation without Mickey's name coming up into it. It was just Mickey.
Mickey was the salt of the earth. Very practical, very dependable. What she said, you could write it in a Bible.
They were very devoted to each other.
We cooked together. We washed and cleaned the cars together. We did the yard work together. We walked every day.
I don't know how long they were married, but they even still held hands when they'd walk down the street together.
We'd see Joe and she walking, holding hands, and we'd wave at them.
You can't fake that kind of love and the devotion. They were what you would want your marriage to be.
They were both dedicated public school teachers, and they had a very quiet life in school and church and friends.
We both loved our jobs. We liked where we lived. We liked the people and the students.
If there were students that needed a coat, needed school supplies, whatever, Joe and Mickey would go buy it for them.
You were so good with kids, as was Mickey, and yet you never had kids of your own.
She couldn't have children. Broke my heart. And hers too. She just didn't talk about it.
So your students were your children?
Yes. And we loved them.
Mickey, she loved those kids, and they loved her.
She was my oldest son's 4th grade teacher. He talked about her all the time. Miss Bryan this, Miss Bryan that. I'll remember that smile for 100 years.
Joe is at a principal's conference in Austin, Texas, 120 miles away.
Mickey stayed home as she normally would when Joe would have to travel for work.
I called Mickey. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. We were watching the Country Music Award, and Reba McEntire, I think, won. Mickey and I were discussing it because she and I used to dance all over the house all the time with country western music.
Do you remember the last thing you ever said to her?
Yeah. I told her, I said, I love you and I'll see you tomorrow. She said, I love you too, I'll see you tomorrow. And it didn't happen.
Next morning, I probably got to school about 7:15 or so. Her door's closed. A few minutes later, I look. Still, her room is not open. The other 3 teachers, all 3 of us were together, and we said, this is not right. She's always here by 7. Always.
Rex Daniels, the elementary principal, his secretary called the house and did not get an answer.
So Rex said, I'm going to call her parents and have them meet me up at the house. First period class, no news, nothing. Second period, the other three teachers and I are off. It's our conference period. And we said, we're going up there. So we got in my car and we drove up there, and the street is blocked off.
I started getting phone calls from people who know is it true. Mickey Bryan has been brutally murdered.
It just seemed like the news just exploded it down.
Right now, we're going to handle it as an intruder and a homicide. It was a complete shock that something like that would happen to Mickey.
The principal from Mickey Bryan's school has made a grim discovery when he finds her dead body in her bedroom.
He said, ladies, I have something horrible to tell you. And the way you can say it other than Mickey has been murdered.
I get a call, needed to go to an address that they're going to murder. And I show up over there and she's laying on the bed, multiple gunshot wounds.
She was shot 4 times with a revolver loaded with rat shot or snake shot.
She was shot once in the abdomen and 3 times in the head.
A snake shot round, it has this clear plastic cap, and that's what's used to keep in the tiny little pellets. There were tiny blue plastic particles that have been scattered around the room that are consistent with snake shot shells.
There was blood spattered on the walls, on the ceiling fan.
It was horrific. I mean, you can't even imagine how bad it was. You had blood everywhere. I mean, there wasn't a spot really in there that wasn't blood on it.
"120 miles away at this conference in Austin, a colleague pulls Joe out and gives him the worst possible news.
He told me, he said, I hate to tell you this, but Mickey's been killed. I said, you gotta be kidding. I said, Mickey Bryan in Clifton? And he said, yes.
Can you describe what that moment's like to hear that?
Instantly, you know your life is not like it was.
I'm sure you had questions.
I said, what can you tell me? Do we know how? He just, all I know, he says that Mickey's dead. I was heartbroken.
We didn't want him to attempt to drive back to Clifton. We drove him back. He sat in the back seat of the car on the way back. There wasn't a whole lot of conversations going on, but you could hear him crying.
They told me I could not go in the house, that she was still there.
Did you hear about what that crime scene looked like?
Yes, but I didn't really realize the magnitude of it until I saw the pictures.
I saw Joe the very afternoon that it happened. Joe put his arms around me, started crying, and he said, what are we going to do without Mickey?
You know, he was devastated.
I started getting phone calls from people who know is it true? Is Mickey Bryan being killed?
It just seemed like the news just exploded it down.
It was just bizarre, something that just did not happen, like I'm in a nightmare and just let me wake up.
The police have no suspect.
Right now, we're going to handle it as an intruder and possibly a burglary.
She would be the last person on earth that I would think would get murdered. It just couldn't be. It just couldn't be.
You have a murder in a small town. Small town's not capable. You've got to bring in the professionals. In Texas, that's the Texas Rangers, and they've got their own lab, and they know what they're doing.
Texas Ranger Joe Wiley has come into Clifton, Texas to assist Police Chief Rob Brennan in the investigation.
Wiley interviews Joe Bryan a day after Joe's wife is murdered. And Joe tells Wiley he has no idea who would want to kill his wife.
This is a tricky case. The neighbors haven't seen anything. There are no witnesses.
Mickey was found wearing nothing but her nightgown. She wasn't wearing any underwear. So, of course, one of the first things you think is maybe there's been a sexual assault.
Mickey Bryan was not raped, according to the rape kit test they ran.
Could this be a burglary or a robbery gone wrong?
The
obvious signs of forced entry.
Some of the things at the crime scene which seemed to indicate a robbery gone wrong were the fact that there was jewelry missing.
She was missing her wristwatch and a Dos Pesos ring and her wedding band.
$1,000 that him and Mickey kept in a little tin metal box. Law enforcement said that they looked for the money. It was not in there.
Joe's .38 caliber revolver is missing from the scene.
It was a gun that they used to kill rattlesnakes out in their yard.
Cops assume this is the murder weapon because it contains the type of ammunition that killed Mickey. In addition to what's missing from the house, there's mysterious evidence in the house.
There is a white pair of Jockey brand underwear that's stained that's found in the trash can in the bathroom.
They found the underwear in the trash can and said that it had been ejaculated in.
Something that would prove very important later is the analysis of the blood at the crime scene.
As far as all of the blood that's found inside the bedroom, the Texas Rangers called in a detective named Robert Thorman.
Robert Thorman was a police detective who had received training in bloodstain pattern analysis, which was a pretty new forensic discipline.
The police collect all that information and try to figure it out as they put together this puzzle of the murder of Mickey Bryant.
You don't want to admit that someone would have the audacity to go in our home and kill the most precious person in your life. And you wonder why. Who did it and why?
Did you have any theories?
No. None.
As the police are investigating, there is an important piece of information. 4 months earlier, there had been another murder in Clifton.
Clifton's a very small town. In fact, you have 2 murders in 4 months is pretty substantial.
17-year-old girl goes missing in Clifton, Texas. Everybody's talking, everybody's wondering what's going on.
He said, we found your sister, and she's gone.
You know, why would somebody hurt Judy?
Were the 2 murders related? And if so, how and why?
Murders were not common back in Clifton, Texas.
There are some small towns around the country that don't experience a murder for a generation or 2 or even longer. What's strange about Clifton, about this case, is that Clifton was already reeling from the gruesome murder that happened just 4 months before Mickey Bryant was murdered.
In June of 1985, a girl named Judy Whitley, soon to be a sophomore at Clifton High School, left her house to go to Hilltop Grocery a few blocks away to buy some snacks.
She was 17 years old. She played in the band at the high school. She liked to read. She played with dolls. God, up until she was 14 years old. She was a good kid. My sister had called me and said, Judy's missing. I said, what do you mean she's missing? She walked to the store. We hadn't seen her since.
They put it out on the wire that night that there was a missing girl.
My mother's a wreck.
We go out in the country and drive around, checking houses, checking friends, looking for Judy. And get a call, say they found her.
They found her maybe 50 yards from Hilltop Grocery in a wooded area. And she had been raped and murdered.
A Clifton police officer broke the news to the family.
He said, we found your sister, and she's gone. Of course, everybody loses it.
Nobody could figure out what was going on. Why would somebody hurt Judy?
3 weeks after Judy's murder, the Whitley family suffered a new shock.
A rumor was going around that Judy had kept a diary.
The police department had gotten a tip from one of Judy's friends something about, well, maybe it was at her grandmother's house. And so they were going to search the grandmother's house the next day.
We're all asleep late at night. All of a sudden we hear this explosion. My grandmother's house. Her house blew up. Luckily, my grandmother was out of town.
I don't know that there was even a diary in the first place, but somebody obviously thought there was. You know, you kind of do a Nancy Drew and you put two and two together. Somebody didn't want them to find that diary.
Weeks go by, and there are no arrests in Judy's murder.
Police say the murder remains a mystery and have declined to comment on any leads in the case.
And then right on the heels of Judy Whitley being murdered, Mickey Bryant is murdered.
After Mickey was murdered, fear was all over Clifton. People were scared.
Jerry had a teenager killed, and he had a school teacher killed. That's a lot.
Especially in small towns, there's a tremendous amount of angst and panic because the whole community's worried that maybe there's a killer out there. And so the police are under enormous pressure right off the bat to solve the crime.
John Grisham, the best-selling author, says he was fascinated by this story, even finding inspiration in Joe Bryant's case from one of his books. 4 days into the investigation of Mickey's murder, there's a new development involving Mickey's brother, Charlie Blue, who had come to town for her funeral. Charlie was an executive at an agrochemical company.
Charlie Blue lived in Florida, so when he came in, he didn't have a car. So he asked to borrow Joe's car.
Charlie Blue's involvement in this case changed the entire trajectory of the investigation. Charlie had a friend who was a former FBI agent, Bud Saunders. So he called up his friend and he said, hey, I want to hire you as a private investigator. Come out, please, and start looking into my sister's case. I want to find out what happened. So they're driving around in Joe's car, just driving through the country talking about the case.
They stopped the car so that the FBI agent can relieve himself beside the road, and then he gets mud on his shoes. So they look in the trunk for a rag to wipe his shoes off with, and they see a flashlight in a cardboard box with the lens up.
Charlie tells police he noticed, quote, what appeared to be blood specks on the lens of the flashlight.
Charlie and Bud contact the Texas Rangers.
So Rangers obtained a search warrant, they remove the flashlight, and they conduct a thorough search of the rest of the car.
The Rangers return the car to Charlie, and he parks it back outside Joe's house.
Joe, meanwhile, does not have any idea that this has happened.
When he is getting his car back for the first time in several days, he takes it, fill it up, and adds this fuel additive because of the kind of model car that it was at the time.
Now, Joe says that when he was looking for the fuel additive, he found that money that had been missing from his house, $850 of the missing $1,000. Joe says he remembered he and Mickey had taken the cash on a shopping trip to Waco, Texas, a couple of weeks before the murder.
He said it had slipped his mind on the worst day of his life that had happened.
He reports it the next day. He reports it to the chief of police, says, hey, found this money. Here's, because of what happened, I forgot where I put it. Just wanted to let you know that we don't need to consider it missing anymore.
The police say that during their search of the car, there was no money in there.
For a police officer, that is very significant. That's going to set off some alarm bells in the minds of these detectives because in their view, Joe Bryant has just lied to them. And for an innocent man, you don't need to lie about anything.
The next day, the crime lab comes back with testing from the specks found on the flashlight.
Law enforcement said the substance that was on the flashlight was blood type O, which was Mickey's blood type.
And it's determined that blue plastic particles found stuck to the blood on the front of the lens had the same, quote, characteristics and composition of the casing of the snake shot that was used to kill Mickey.
Police now believe that the flashlight is linked to Mickey's murder, and the fact that it's found in Joe's car, in their minds, implicates Joe.
Armed with the information from the flashlight, along with what they consider to be a false story from Joe Bryant, police get an arrest warrant for Joe Bryant.
The doorbell rang, and I went to the doorbell, and there stands the sheriff, Mr. Wiley, the Texas Ranger, and Rob Brennan, the police chief. And they walk in and tell me I'm arrested for the murder of Mickey.
What was your reaction?
I said, you got to be kidding.
Were you really surprised? You had no idea this was coming?
No, why would I be expecting it? Had no clue.
Initially, everybody thought he was innocent, and then all the rumors started.
Investigators found what they believed was a clue that Joe Bryant was leading a secret life. The clue? A Chippendales calendar.
Boston County resident Joe Bryant is awaiting trial for the murder of his wife. Bryant is accused of the October 15th shooting death of his wife, Mickey.
I am watching the nightly news, and they put up my uncle's picture and say he was arrested for the murder of his wife.
I was at my mom and dad's house, and I heard someone saying, Penny, have you listened to the news? They've arrested Joe Bryant.
I didn't believe Joe murdered Mickey for a second. Nobody did.
Everybody was, no, that didn't happen. He was deacon at the Baptist church.
Not in a million years would he ever even think about doing something like that. He has no reason.
Joe's arrest was like a shockwave through town.
It wasn't just that many people in Clifton doubted that Joe had a reason to kill Mickey. A lot of them doubted that Joe could have killed Mickey.
He had an alibi. Joe was at an education conference some 120 miles away in Austin.
That night, there was a terrible rainstorm in both Austin and Clifton that later turned into a heavy fog.
Joe had some real vision issues. Did not drive at night, if at all avoidable.
One would have to believe that he left his room, got into his car somewhere around 9:30 at night, drove 120 miles in a driving rainstorm.
It would be like a 5-hour round trip with normal weather conditions.
So, for him to have driven to Clifton in a rainstorm and killed his wife, cleaned up, and gotten back to Austin and been in a meeting in a suit and tie at 8 o'clock in the morning was virtually impossible.
But we're talking about 9 o'clock at night, and when she was found, at 7 the next morning, that's a lot of hours in there. Makes you wonder. Initially, everybody thought he was innocent, and then all the rumors started.
The rumors weren't just about Mickey's death. Some people were trying to tie Joe to the murder of Judy Whitley 4 months earlier.
People were kind of saying, well, if he did that, he very well could have done this.
It was said that he killed the Whitley girl. His wife found out about it, so he had to kill her too.
Rumor went around that the girl cleaned house for them, which was false. But they got it all bundled up in a neat little package, so nobody had to be afraid.
Out of jail on a $50,000 bond and adamant that he didn't do it, Joe said that he was trying to figure out who did.
I'm thinking, how did someone get in her house? And I maybe thought someone could have made copies of the keys and gotten in the house.
One thing that he says is that he had this seemingly innocuous interaction with a security member of the hotel by the name of Jack Shaw.
Tell me about Jack Shaw.
This gentleman walks up with a Hyatt Regency name tag on and tells me they've been reported that their maids are taking things from the rooms, and will I work with them to try to catch somebody?
Joe said, yeah, he'd be willing to do that.
He tells me, just leave your keys and some money on the dresser. Later that afternoon, I went back upstairs and he met me at the door. He opened the door with a key. He had on a Hyatt Regency blazer and a name tag. It says Hyatt Regency. So why would I doubt who he said he was?
He thought it was just legit. But he got to thinking after Mickey was killed that maybe there was something there.
I drove to Austin and I asked, do you have Jack Shaw who works here? No, we do not.
Joe said he was trying to prove his innocence, but when investigators heard this story, they were suspicious and conducted their own investigation.
They never found Jack Shaw.
Hyatt's position was that nobody by that name worked at that hotel.
So that made Joe look very bad. It made it look like Joe was lying to the police. It magnified how guilty the police viewed Joe.
And it wasn't the only thing they believed he was hiding. During the search of his trunk, investigators found what they believed was a clue that Joe Bryan was leading a secret life. A Chippendales calendar.
A Chippendales calendar of guys, with just pants on and no shirts.
They immediately suspected Joe was gay. That could be the motive. It was all whispering.
In Texas, being gay was against the law.
You could be arrested and fined for homosexual sex, even if it was in the privacy of your own home.
Things are different now today than they were back then. In Central Texas, it was a big thing, especially the principal of your high school.
Joe said that the Chippendales calendar was something that he and Mickey had bought together as a gag gift for one of their single friends. But that Chippendale calendar police took as proof positive that this man is indeed gay, and therefore had motive to kill his wife.
The police department and the Texas Rangers started throwing out the idea that he's gay.
The chief came to my office and he insinuated that Joe was gay. I told him he was out of his mind. That was not true. Just because Joe drank Dr. Pepper instead of beer and played the piano instead of golf did not make him gay.
The number one list of possible motives was queer.
In the investigation notes, police seemed to question your sexual orientation.
Yes.
They wrote comments alluding that you being gay was the motive to murdering your wife.
They implied that, yes. They never said it to my face because I'd have knocked them out.
Under suspicion for killing his wife, Joe's life was unraveling.
Mickey's family cuts off all communication with Joe.
He's disgusting. If you want out of a marriage, that's what divorces are for. You don't shoot somebody. A lot of people knew from the get-go that he had done that. I think he just thought he was so smart. He didn't think anybody would ever dream that he would do that.
The stakes for Joe Bryan couldn't be higher.
Decisions were made during that trial by Joe Bryan that made this a completely different case.
It went bad.
A jury was seated late today in the Bosque County murder trial of Clifton High School principal Joe Bryan.
Before the trial started, I got with Joe and I told him we need a change of venue. He said definitely not. I'm innocent and I want to be judged by my peers.
After more than 5 hours of intense questioning, attorneys selected 7 men and 5 women to sit on the jury that will decide Bryan's innocence or guilt.
Joe Bryan had hired attorneys out of Waco to represent him, Charles McDonald and Lynn Malone.
On the other side, we have District Attorney Andrew McMullen and Special Prosecutor Gary Llewellyn.
Llewellyn was hired by Mickey Bryan's family.
He was paid $10,000 by Mickey's family to prosecute Joe alongside Andrew McMullen.
The defense objected to Llewellyn's presence at the counsel table.
This is an offense against the people in the state, and it should be tried by representatives of the state, namely the district attorney that's appointed.
The use of the special prosecutor is not uncommon in Texas. It's a perfectly legal thing that you can do, but the victim's family was financially supporting the prosecution. And that is something that's very unique.
The state said Llewellyn was hired as the special prosecutor to help District Attorney Andy McMullen, who was the sole prosecutor for 3 counties and was overworked.
Bryan pleaded not guilty to the murder today in open court.
But this is the quintessential circumstantial evidence case. The murder weapon is literally missing. There was nothing that placed Joe in Clifton that night. No eyewitnesses saw him or his car. Even more importantly, there was no forensic evidence gathered from the crime scene itself that conclusively showed Joe Bryant was the murderer.
A standing room only crowd in the Bosque County District Courtroom listened today as Texas Ranger Joe Wiley confirmed that there is no scientific evidence linking Clifton High School Principal Joe Bryant to the murder of his wife.
The prosecution hinged on the flashlight.
James Charles Blue of Plant City, Florida, told prosecutors Blue found a blood-stained flashlight in the trunk of Bryant's car.
Law enforcement said there was back spatter on the flashlight from type O blood, which was Mickey's blood type. But while the flashlight was found 4 days after the crime in the trunk of Joe's car, the car hadn't been in his possession for those 4 days.
There's all kinds of things that could have happened. It's a matter of chain of custody.
Charlie Blue had the car, and when asked at trial if he put the flashlight in the trunk, he said no, that he found it there. Even Joe testified that his gut told him Charlie had not planted the flashlight. So how did it get there?
Anybody could have entered or left the car. They could have put the flashlight in.
For a juror to believe the prosecution's theory, they would have to believe that Joe was smart enough to mastermind the murder, yet still made this critical mistake by leaving the flashlight in the trunk of the car.
Who in their right mind would do what they said I was supposed to have done and just leave the flashlight in the car, in the trunk?
Where's the last time you saw that flashlight?
Before I left to go to Austin.
And where was it?
On the dresser in our bedroom.
What the prosecution needed to do was prove that the flashlight was involved in Mickey's murder, and they called a witness who did just that.
Detective Robert Thorman analyzed the blood spatter at the crime scene and took the stand to describe what he believed that blood spatter proved.
Everything that he testified to had numbers and data. It sounded scientific. When you have a law enforcement officer saying, I have received special training, that's incredibly powerful.
People want to believe the authorities. They want to believe the police. They are in awe of the system.
What Detective Thorman testified to, essentially, is that he believed that the killer would have to be holding the flashlight at the time of the murder.
And that when he shot Mickey Bryan, the blood spattered back on him and onto the flashlight. And this testimony did what nothing else had done. It tied the flashlight to the bedroom at the time of the murder.
Thorman also testified that the killer would have to have changed his clothes and his shoes in order not to leave a bloody trail. So the implication was that if it was your bedroom, your clothes, and your shoes, it would be easy to change, and that implicated Joe Bryant.
There's no proof of that. The expert is not qualified to speculate, but the judge let it all in. That was damaging.
A lab analyst who evaluated the stain on the underwear found in the trash can testified that it was semen and that it could have come from Joe Bryant.
My uncle got on the stand, to try to defend himself, and it just seemed unreal watching my uncle's life on the line.
Brian, in tears, turned to the jury and said, quote, I did not kill Mickey, so help me God. Brian said he did not know who put the flashlight in the trunk of his car. I don't know who killed her, Brian said. If I did, I wouldn't be up here fighting for my life.
Joe had no alibi other than his own word that he was asleep in his hotel room that night, and he offered no theory as to who else might have done it.
And then he got turned over to Gary Llewellyn to cross-examine, and Llewellyn just literally tore him apart.
Llewellyn chipped away at Joe's credibility, suggesting that his actions were actually consistent with guilt. He testified about this fanciful thing with this Jack Shaw story.
To be honest with you, I don't know what to make of the story. I have questioned Joe for 30 years about this story. He says it's true.
If it looks like you're lying as to this one thing that you said, then it's difficult sometimes for a jury to believe, oh, he's telling the truth here, but he's lying here. People just generally tend to think, well, we can't trust anything that he says.
As As for motive, the state didn't need to prove one, but Texas Ranger Joe Wiley had pointed to her life insurance policy and testified she's worth over $300,000 to him dead, if you want to surmise a motive.
36 character witnesses took the stand and painted this picture of Joe's love for Mickey, but it was unclear if that was going to be enough.
I was walking down the hall and one of our friends called us in and they said they already got the verdict. Anytime that happens, you know it's not good.
A Bosque County jury this afternoon convicted and sentenced former Clifton High School principal Joe Bryan on murder charges.
When you hear that guilty verdict,
You're stunned. Like, how could they do this?
their beloved high school principal.
You just can't believe something like that can happen to you.
Things just did not add up.
A shocking piece of new information was found.
You have another alternate, much more viable suspect. It completely changes the dynamic of everything.
This is a bombshell.
He said, I'm gonna kill you. The look in his eyes was pure evil. That was the most evil look I've ever seen.
The plot of The Guardians is based on a real story, sad to say.
John Grisham, world famous, so believed in Joe Bryan's innocence, it helped spark the idea for his 2019 best-selling novel, The Guardians.
Really intrigued by the factual scenario that convicted Joe Bryan.
When you hear that guilty verdict,
You're stunned. Like, how could they do this? And you're innocent.
Who killed his beloved wife, Mickey, the woman he loved? He's Santa Claus. He's your Sunday school teacher.
I truly believe he is a very dangerous person.
Some people were trying to tie Joe to the murder of Judy Whitley 4 months earlier.
They discover that actually there was a suspect in that murder.
He wanted to handcuff me.
When he saw you, he got hooked and he didn't leave you alone.
the logical question was whether or not he had anything to do with Mickey's.
Bam. Mic drop. This is a bombshell.
Joe Bryan guilty of the October 1985 shooting death of his wife, Mickey.
Convicted and sentenced former Clifton High School principal Joe Bryan on murder charges.
The state's version was that Joe was 120 miles away in Austin, Texas. He drove through the night back to Clifton. He murdered Mickey when she was in her house alone. Got rid of the murder weapon, drove back to Austin, and pretended to be ignorant of everything that had happened when he was informed the next day.
Bryan was given the maximum punishment for the murder, 99 years in prison.
When you hear that guilty verdict,
you're stunned, like, how could they do this? And you're innocent.
Joe Bryan had no comment on the verdict. He's soon to be transferred to the state prison in Huntsville.
Everything you love has been taken from you. Everything you worked for has been taken from you. Everything materially that you had has been taken from you. All you have is just yourself.
Bryan, who was convicted of the murder earlier this week, was moved to the McLennan County Jail last night at the request of the Bosque County Sheriff's Department.
The first time I went to prison to see Joe, I cried the whole time.
This man who's played cards with us, taken us to the movies, is now having to talk to us through a glass. I always felt like he felt so sad and ashamed, over something that he couldn't control.
Attorney for convicted murderer Joe Bryan filed a 39-page appeal today.
But then 2 years later, a huge break for the defense. Testimony by police at Joe's trial suggested that he'd killed Mickey for a $300,000 life insurance policy. But the truth was they had insurance on each other. That was half that amount.
So that was a critical fact that the Court of Appeal felt merited a new trial. Joe Bryan's conviction is overturned and he was released from prison.
Even though Joe is free, he's far from off the hook. Prosecutors are determined to retry the case.
The second trial is moved to Comanche, Texas, 70 miles away from Clifton.
Well, I figured they'd get it away from Clifton, away from the rumors, and all this would be fixed.
So ultimately, you got a second trial.
Yes.
How did that compare at all with the first one?
Same railroad track. It was the same judge. From what I understand, it was just a replay, just a summer rerun. The trial was.
This time, he's lost a lot of the supporters that he had before. I think that people had largely settled into the idea that he must actually be a murderer.
The defense in the second case presented only 5 character witnesses, which is only a fraction of the 36 that testified in the first trial.
Ashamed to say it, but I didn't want to be involved anymore. And that's how I handled it. Just not going to do any of that anymore. Put it behind me.
Yet again, Detective Robert Thorman testifies about the blood spatter.
After just 3 hours of deliberation, another jury convicts Joe Bryan of the murder of his wife. After the second conviction, it seems like it might be case closed, but not for everybody, including a man named Leon Smith.
I was publisher of the Clifton Record, and also its editor, was following the case, and things just did not add up. I didn't think he did it. I didn't think he had the personality to do that. It appeared that he and Mickey got along fine. It's just a remarkable couple.
That's when the Judy Whitley case, the case of the young woman murdered only 4 months before Mickey Bryan, comes back to the forefront.
High school student's body was later found in a wooded area not far from her home.
In 1991, I was visited by Don Whitley. They had not solved his daughter's murder, and it bothered them all the time, and they thought about her all the time, and they wanted to know why was she killed, and who did it.
The Whitley family wanted the show Unsolved Mysteries to investigate. Leon agreed to help contact the show.
I asked him if there was a particular angle that he thought that I should take. And he said, well, they need to consider both murders as linked. Mickey Bryan and Judy Whitley. Now, as I had mentioned it to the initial chief, that I thought it was strange that 2 murders like that happened so close together. And I thought that there might be a linkage there. But they kept telling me there's no way. There's no way these things have anything to do with each other. They're completely separate cases.
Leon reached out to Clifton Police Chief Jim Vanderhoof, who had taken over from Rod Brennan as Chief of Police of Clifton, Texas.
He was real serious about trying to clear up some cold cases. So we agreed to get together and go through the Whitley box at the police station to look through evidence.
Smith gets a look at documents that reference that there was a suspect in the Whitley murder. It's a man named Dennis Dunlap, a local cop who had been part of the small Clifton force.
Dennis Dunlap was a strange character, I'll tell you.
He unsettled many of the women in Clifton.
I started getting this really uneasy feeling.
You know, and you can feel it when somebody's staring.
When he saw you, he got hooked and he didn't leave you alone.
Leon Smith is now completely immersed, poring over the case of Joe Bryan. Leon decides to visit Joe in prison and interview him about both Judy Whitley's murder and Mickey's murder.
I was led into a big room that had a cage in the middle of it, sat down and said hello, and we stayed there for over 4 hours without being interrupted.
Joe told Leon that when he got out, he was going to find Mickey's killer. When Leon asked Joe about the Whitley murder, Joe said that he and Mickey had been in Arkansas the day Judy went missing.
He'd heard rumors, he said, that an officer on the force had done it, but at the time he'd urged people to look at all the facts before you start making a decision about who's guilty.
Leon published the 4-hour interview in 3 installments in the Clifton Record. What he didn't include was the name of the police officer Joe had heard had done it, Dennis Dunlap.
Dennis Dunlap had initially been a suspect.
Right off the bat, everything started looking at Dunlap. Dennis Dunlap was a strange character, I'll tell you.
He was like really intense. Dishwater blonde hair, and he always wore cowboy boots.
He had joined the Clifton Police Force in January of 1985.
I didn't like him. Didn't think much about the way he did his job.
Shortly after he had come to town, he began to try to pick up women.
Judy Whitley's sister Patricia met him at a convenience store where she worked.
He actually asked me out on a date from the store. So we went to Waco like everybody else used to do. Drove back to Clifton, took me to his apartment, and then I said, I gotta go to the bathroom. So I walked down the hall, and then I started getting this really uneasy feeling, because when I was walking down the hall, I could see pictures of, well, it was women with leathers and chains on. It was unnerving. And so I just came back and I said, I think I'm ready to go home. I never did go out with him again.
I worked at the dry cleaners and he came in. It was really loud in there. I didn't hear what he was saying. And I was ringing him up, but when he walked out, and the lady behind him that I worked with said, you need to be careful. He just asked you to go home and go to bed with him.
When he approached me, I was at the Dairy Queen with my youngest son. You know, and you can feel it when somebody's staring. I waited until he left before my son and I left because I didn't want him to see what kind of car I got in.
When he saw you, he got hooked and he didn't leave you alone?
He wouldn't take no for the answer. We drove off and he followed us.
The look in his eyes was pure evil. That was the most evil look I've ever seen.
But not everybody said no at first.
We actually dated for about a week and a half, and we got married.
Elaine Allen was working at one of Clifton's 2 grocery stores and raising 3 sons.
It was hard. Then here comes this city cop that took an interest in me. It's just like a wonder came into my life.
Elaine says things between her and Dunlap changed almost immediately after they got married.
He wanted to handcuff me and have sex with me. And it scared me, and I said, no. We're not doing that stuff,
Dunlap wasn't only stalking the women of Clifton. According to Elaine, he was stalking his own wife.
My mobile home had one big window facing out the back. And he told me that he was watching me. And I said, watching me? He had night vision binoculars, and he was sitting across the street watching me. And then, because we were married, he would just come in the house, and he would stand there and watch me sleep. It really gave me the creeps really bad that he could be standing 5 feet away from me, and I didn't know it.
Elaine kicked Dunlap out only 2 weeks after they were married and only 6 weeks before Judy Whitley was murdered.
The Clifton High School student's body was later found in a wooded area not far from her home.
Dunlap volunteered to be the cop who broke the news to Judy's family that she'd been murdered.
Dunlap had told the family things that he should not have known.
Remember, Judy Whitley allegedly had a diary that she kept in her grandmother's house?
Sometime during the night, before they had a chance to go look for the diary, the house blew up.
He was the officer on duty the night of the house explosion. He did not stay around to help, according to the sheriff's office dispatch records, and let other officers direct traffic and deal with the fire department.
The morning after the explosion, Dunlap was actually interviewed by Texas Ranger Joe Wiley. According to Wiley's report, Dunlap asked to be given a polygraph.
Afterward, the examiner concluded that Dunlap was not responsible for the death of Judy Whitley and had not been sexually involved with her.
Fellow officer Kenneth Fields says Dunlap was, however, relieved of his duties and he resigned the very next day. He then left town.
Now, more than 6 years later, Judy's murder remained unsolved.
Fields, for one, continued to believe that Dunlap was responsible.
Fields wrote in an affidavit that he wanted to arrest Dunlap after he'd left town, but was told he had no case.
Fields said he kept investigating, but just could not get any hard evidence against Dunlap.
Now that Leon learned Dunlap had been a suspect in Judy's murder, the logical question was whether or not he had anything to do with Mickey's. In 1996, the Texas Rangers, along with the Clifton police, tracked down and interviewed another one of Dunlap's ex-wives, a woman he'd married after leaving Clifton. She made statements on a recorded interview that he may have been with Mickey the night she was murdered.
All he told me was that he dated her. He was dating that lady. He was going, I want to say, I'm not sure, he dropped her off that night, that evening.
Bam. Mic drop. This is a bombshell. This is earth-shattering.
Leon Smith was convinced that Dennis Dunlap had something to do with Judy's murder, so he wrote him letters about it.
Leon was working with the current Clifton police chief, Jim Vanderhoof, who, in trying to solve Judy's case, had learned about the suspicions against Dunlap.
So now he had begun this campaign to try to see if he could get him to come forward, come clean, show up, come back to the crime scene.
Leon and Dunlap exchanged letters over a few months.
On my last letter to him, I mentioned points at which he was considered a suspect in Judy Whitley's murder.
Dunlap denied he'd done it and told Leon he'd have to go in a different direction because it wasn't me, he said. Dunlap hadn't taken the bait, and at that point, the trail went cold again.
I got a phone call from Chief Vanderhoof, who told me that Dennis Dunlap was dead. He hanged himself in his garage. My biggest concern then was, how do we prove that he killed Whitley?
It seemed like it was the end of the story.
But the local police had found Leon's letters to Dunlap when they investigated his death and contacted the Clifton Police Department. Clifton PD and the Texas Rangers sent a team to investigate, and that's when they got a few breaks.
My name is Christine Nix, Sergeant with Texas Rangers Company of Waco.
Rex Childers, Sergeant with Clifton Police Department.
The officers were interviewing Dunlap's most recent ex-wife, who had divorced him the year before he died.
How did the subject of the Whitley girl come up in this room?
He was laying on the couch and he said, well, some Texas Rangers may come by and see me, or they may take me away. And then I said, well, why? He said, because he was a suspect in a case where he was a policeman at.
Did you ever have an occasion to hear him talk about it?
Yes, he had called his mother, and he says, Mom, they're after me again, something to that effect, about that murder there in Clifton. I heard him whispering to the phone, I'm glad I didn't find gray tape in the trunk of my car.
The ex-wife went on to say that Dunlap had confessed he'd murdered Judy to his closest friend. That friend then told her about it.
He says, well, yeah, Dennis told me that he did do it.
When investigators questioned Dunlap's friend, he signed an affidavit saying Dunlap had told him about the murder.
He confirmed that Dunlap said he killed the girl, Judy Whitley. He bragged about how he did it and how she died. A lot of detail.
Hoping to get a posthumous indictment, the police department continued to investigate. Although they weren't able to get that indictment, the Clifton Police Department still wanted to provide an answer to the Whitley family. And in 1999, they publicly named Dennis Dunlap responsible for the death of Judy Whitley.
I was devastated. It makes you so cold inside.
Nobody besides Leon was looking into Mickey's case anymore.
As far as law enforcement was concerned, Mickey's case was closed. That's when the Bryan family found Walter Reeves.
Walter Reeves will take up the cause of people who say I am innocent and I've been wrongly convicted. And that's what he did in Joe's case.
It's not just enough to be innocent. That doesn't get you anywhere. You have to have something else to be able to get back in court on.
In 2012, Reeves requested DNA testing to see if it could clear Joe.
The DNA results were inconclusive, but one result from the test was completely unexpected. The first step in the DNA analysis tested the lens of that flashlight that had been the linchpin in the state's argument. And according to Reeves, it came back presumptively negative for the presence of blood.
What was presumed by everybody to be blood turned out to not be blood.
Walter enlisted some of his students at Baylor University's law school.
I was Walter Reeves's intern at Baylor Law School, and this was the first case he assigned me.
She just took it and ran with it.
She wanted to go in and basically start from scratch. As far as investigating goes, it brings new light, new eyes to what you've investigated. What are you missing?
The most shocking piece of new information came from that 1996 interview with Dennis Dunlap's most recent ex-wife.
Did he ever mention any other murders or any other cases?
Either I read it or he told me about it was the lady where the principal murdered her. All he told me was that he dated her. He was dating that lady. I want to say, I'm not for sure, he dropped her off that night or that evening.
Bam. Right? Like, that's like mic drop, okay? This is earth-shattering news.
Before, the state's narrative was a cohesive unit. Theoretically possible that this man drove from Austin to Clifton, killed his wife for whatever reason, and then drove back to Austin. If you have Officer Dunlap in Mickey's house the night of the murder, it completely changes the dynamic of everything. Not only do you have another alternate, much more viable suspect, but even if you don't count him as a suspect, the entire narrative of the state's theory has to change.
Joe should have been exonerated and freed years ago, but it hasn't happened.
Do you believe that one day justice will be served?
Yes, I do. We believe the blood-spattered testimony, the flashlight, the stuff we found out about Dunlap. You pile them on top of each other, and that establishes that he's actually innocent.
By 2018, Joe Bryan had spent 30 years in prison, and by all accounts, he was a model prisoner.
Stayed busy reading books, watching the news, reading newspapers, working puzzles, lots of library books.
He played piano for the prison chapel. He tutored other inmates for their GEDs.
You have to accept the fact, whether you like it or not, you're in prison. You can either make the most of it and be the person you always were, or you can be someone who acts out, who's rude, crude, disrespectful, mad at the world. I chose to be me.
Even though he'd been eligible for parole starting in 2007, his parole had been repeatedly denied.
Every time he went in to have a patrol hearing, we always would think this would be it. He was going to get out, which he never did, so then it would be a disappointment again to us.
He knows probably in the back of his mind, if he ever once said he was sorry that he did this, he probably could have gotten out on parole, but he refuses to do that because he didn't do it.
Joe told me when I visited him in jail, if I have to die in prison, I'll just have to die in prison. But I did not kill Mickey, and I'm not going to say that I did just to get out. He said, I just want to clear my name.
A game changer for Joe was a two-part report by Pamela Koloff, published by the New York Times and the investigative journalism site ProPublica.
It asked, did he do it or had there been a terrible mistake?
Leon Smith, he's the one that gave Pam Koloff a lot of information, and then she investigated.
John Grisham
world famous, the author of dozens of books focusing on crime, read the article and was immediately hooked.
It reads like a novel. It's a page turner. I read it and reread it. I was struck by the really incredibly sloppy science that was given to the jury.
The article focused on the blood spatter expert, Detective Robert Thorman, who testified at both of his trials and called into question his testimony and his credentials.
He had spent 40 hours at a seminar learning blood spatter techniques 4 months before the murder. He had no real scientific background.
Anytime you have questionable forensic evidence that came in during a trial, what you can do is you can ask the Texas Forensic Science Commission to look at it to get involved.
We filed a complaint, which they accepted, and then they ended up taking it, getting their own experts.
Unfortunately, Mr. Thorman's methodology that he utilized never followed, even in 1985, the proper procedure. Detective Thorman made several opinions, of which none of them were scientifically supportable.
The commission determined that Thorman's testimony was unreliable.
And not understanding the limitations of bloodstain pattern analysis, and not understanding how to use proper techniques, that is catastrophic in a criminal trial.
The blood stain analysis was not based on scientific principles. It was all junk. We knew that. It was all bogus science. Occasionally, I'll read about a case and get mad. Don't want to get involved and contact the lawyers, contact somebody, and go see the person in prison. I went to see him in Beaumont, Texas. We had a great visit. He's Santa Claus, okay? He's your Sunday school teacher. He's the sweetest guy you're going to meet, okay? His spirit was unbroken, and he laughed a lot, smiled a lot. Pretty remarkable guy.
Grisham so believed in Joe Bryan's innocence, it helped spark the idea for his 2019 best-selling novel, The Guardians.
This is part of the author's note to The Guardians, and I write, the plot of The Guardians is based on a real story, sad to say. It involves a Texas inmate named Joe Bryan. Joe should have been exonerated and freed years ago, but it hasn't happened.
At this point, it seems like momentum was really building for Joe's case. His attorneys are determined to get him a new trial.
A man behind bars for decades lands back in the courtroom. He's trying to get his murder conviction overturned.
All of us in our hearts thought this may be the time that they would release him.
Honestly, I felt like, the world is getting to see what we've known for 30-something years, the truth.
The stakes here potentially are he can be released.
A man behind bars for decades lands back in the courtroom. Joe Bryan was convicted of murdering his wife 33 years ago, but now he has one last shot at freedom.
Joe Bryan was back in the courthouse, this time for what's called an evidentiary hearing.
The hope of Joe's team with the evidentiary hearing was that it would lead to a new trial and for the chance for Joe to finally prove his actual innocence in a court of law.
Joe's legal team argued there is newly discoverable and newly available evidence that shows he's actually innocent. And they said some of the evidence against him at trial was false.
But it is your last chance of trying to get your case set aside and going home.
In your original trial, you're innocent until proven guilty. Now you're guilty until proven innocent.
There were a lot of people in the courtroom that really cared about the case.
Bryan's family filled the front of the courtroom. Several people with shirts that say "Justice for Joe" are supporting the 77-year-old during the hearing.
The defense looked at forensic testing from the first two trials, including the semen on the underwear, which current testing actually showed was inconclusive, and the blood spatter evidence. Blood spatter expert Celestina Rossi was brought in to testify about the blood spatter testimony of Officer Robert Thorman in the original trials.
It's false, it's unscientific, and it's the most horrifying thing I've ever read in my life.
And And when she said that, this courtroom packed with people, you could have heard a pin drop. It was incredibly powerful.
Would you tell the court what that is?
The defense followed up with a bombshell.
Thorman all but admitted that he wouldn't testify the same way now that he testified back then.
Celestina Rossi read Thorman's written affidavit aloud in court. I will agree that some of the techniques and methodology were incorrect. Therefore, some of my testimony was not correct.
The expert who sent Joe to prison for 35 years now says he was wrong.
And that's a big deal.
In his affidavit, he says, "In no way did I lie in my report or testimony, as I was doing what I thought was correct as a result of my training at the time." In reading his trial transcripts, I believe that he believed what he was saying was correct.
Defense attorney Jesse Freud suggested very strongly that Dennis Dunlap was the killer of Mickey Bryan and not Joe Bryan.
The defense submitted the tape of his ex-wife, who said he'd told her he may have been with Mickey the night she was killed.
I want to say, I'm not for sure, he dropped her off that night or that evening.
Alternate suspects were important. Any other explanation to give to a jury as to who actually did this is something you must do.
Look, it's a big deal that there was another murder 4 months earlier in this little town in Texas.
I believe that if the Clifton Police Department and the Texas Rangers, all law enforcement justice system, would have arrested Dennis Dunlap for the murder of Judy Whitley, Mickey would still be alive today. And my uncle obviously would not be in jail.
Who do you believe killed your wife?
Dennis Dunlap.
Joe's team argued all of this amounted to a wrongful conviction and was grounds for a sentence to be vacated.
But the prosecution said the ex-wife's recollection in 1996 is spotty, uncertain, and inaccurate.
And they argued that even without the underwear analysis and blood spatter testimony from Robert Thorman, there still had been plenty of evidence tying Joe Bryan to the murder of Mickey Bryan. They point to what they call Joe Bryan's conflicting stories or other expert testimony from the original trial and evidence like the blue specks on the flashlight.
We knew all along that that flashlight was present at the scene of this crime because of those blue chips of plastic.
According to the state, there was more than just blood spatter or even the presence of blood on the flashlight tying it to the crime scene.
No one can eliminate that flashlight as having been present at the scene of this crime.
The prosecution said applicant presented no evidence that shows that Dennis Dunlap is the murderer of Mickey Bryan, and he is not.
We've had two juries that have found Mr. Bryan guilty and have assessed a 99-year punishment in this case.
I felt like we proved everything that we told the court we were going to prove.
Honestly, I felt like, the world is getting to see what we've known for 30-something years.
All of us in our hearts thought this may be the time that they would release him.
A former Central Texas principal convicted of his wife's 1986 murder will not get a new trial.
The judge ended up basically just going with the state.
The court made the call that the new evidence presented by the defense was not persuasive enough to overturn the conviction.
We were shocked when the judge ruled, and I cannot begin to explain his rationale or reasoning.
We were really disappointed, surprised, and confused as to why the result wasn't there.
It's better to not convict anybody and let a bad guy go than it is to convict a wrong person.
On top of all of that, Joe is denied parole for a 7th time. Penny Blue, Mickey's sister, still has not wavered in her belief that Joe is guilty.
I want him right where he is. I truly believe he is a very dangerous person.
I thought that was it. I thought he'd spend the rest of his life in prison.
You never give up hope, and I've never lost hope on this, ever.
Nobody was expecting this tear-jerking twist to an over 30-year saga.
You keep thinking, I hope this is not a joke.
In the spring of 2020, finally, at long last, stunning news for Joe Bryan. After being denied parole 7 times, Joe Bryan was finally released in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. Why the change of heart from the parole board? His age? COVID? That's an unknown, but Joe's relief was palpable. What was it like when you finally left prison? You get off the bus and you see your family members there?
You fight for something so long, and then you get it and it has such an impact on your life. I was very thankful.
I wept. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy for Joe to get out.
I don't know that he would have been able to survive much longer in prison. I really don't.
That's your brother, Joe. Old man Robert.
Joe Bryan went into prison middle-aged, and he exited an old man, 79 years old, with congestive heart failure.
My family and friends were clapping, hugging me. I was hugging them. I was crying. You keep thinking, I hope this is not a joke. Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. Pass the biscuits.
He moved in with his brother and sister-in-law over 200 miles from Clifton.
One of the first things you did when you came out of prison is you went straight to a piano.
I have a very deep faith. I can go upstairs where the piano is there at the house and play, and I'll play 35 minutes, 40 minutes, and just have a overwhelming peace.
You even met members of your family that weren't born before you went to prison.
It was like I had never been away. And I'm not a technology person, and my nieces are fantastic in helping me deal with iPhones and iPads and Zoom.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Uncle Joe.
You got to celebrate your 80th birthday at your brother's home. Tell me what that celebration was like.
Oh gosh, they had balloons and streamers. It was just absolutely great to be there with family.
The reporter, Leon Smith, who championed your case, I know he passed away just this past year. I imagine you still think of him often.
Oh, all the time. And one thing that we both stood up for from the very beginning was the truth.
There have been limits to Joe Bryan's freedom. He wore an ankle monitor for over a year.
Stays on 24 hours a day.
Joe Bryan hasn't been exonerated. He's still a guilty man in our system. And that's the burden he carries. You and your lawyer did a podcast about wrongful conviction.
I'm just deeply honored to have the man himself, Joe Bryan, with us today on the show.
Part of our problem in America, we're naive about our judicial system, about our police officers, and about our courts. Our criminal justice system is set up to get a conviction and someone clap him on the back and say, good job done, we got him. Now he can spend the rest of his life in prison, and they don't care whether you're innocent or you're guilty. If you think it can't happen to you in America, you are wrong.
What do you want the world to know about you, Joe?
Number one, I'm not a killer. I didn't kill Mickey. I loved Mickey. She was She was my other self.
What do you want the world to know about Mickey?
Mickey loved life, and she and I were a real good match. I've got a big picture of her in my bedroom, of the two of us together. And sometimes I catch myself talking to the picture.
What do you tell her?
I'm ready to see you. I can't wait to see you again.
I think a just ending to Joe's story is to tell the story of who killed his beloved wife Mickey, the woman he loved. I mean, that would be a great ending.
I hope to be found actual innocent, so it's really truly over with. Then for the first time in 34 years, I can have a sigh of relief, and I can go visit Mickey's grave and tell her we know who did it. And that way we can get some peace of mind for Mickey too. So justice is not just for me, it's for her too.
Really powerful reporting, Amy. And as you know, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has denied Joe Bryan's efforts to get a new trial.
And the Supreme Court has declined to hear his case as well. That is our program for tonight. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Amy Robach.
And I'm David Muir. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, thanks for watching. Good night.